Just as my mother-in-law went over to the couple to get the Tupperware, my father-in-law suddenly collapsed and fell out of his chair. Everyone turned to look at him, and he was holding his stomach, clearly in a lot of pain. "What's wrong with you?" someone asked. My father-in-law then said something that surprised me. "I just ate a little bit of food from the kitchen. Why is my stomach suddenly upset?" I didn't miss my mother-in-law's comment either. "My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a 20-year-old housewife. My husband Vernon and I got married last year. We're the same age, so we have similar conversations and values. Because of that, we get along really well, and we're just as in love now as we were before we started dating. However, there was one thing that bothered me a little after we got married. When we went to visit my in-laws to give our wedding greetings, I noticed that my mother-in-law was a bit old-fashioned. She said, 'When you get married, you come to your house and live with us, right?' She asked as if it was a given. My husband and I both replied at the same time, 'What?' We had no intention of doing that. So my husband said, 'No, we're planning to live on our own after getting married.' My mother-in-law replied, 'What? But you're the eldest son.' Both my husband and I were troubled by this. Then my father-in-law stepped in and said, 'That's an old-fashioned way of thinking. Do whatever you want, Vernon and Elizabeth.' His words helped calm my mother-in-law down. But there was another issue that made things even more uncomfortable. Neither my husband nor I had planned to have a wedding ceremony. We didn't like anything too fancy and thought it would be better to use the money for travel instead. When I told my in-laws about this, my mother-in-law's face turned pale again. "How can you not have a wedding?" she asked. As I mentioned earlier, my mother-in-law is very traditional, so she was strongly against our idea of skipping the wedding. She was worried about how to explain to the relatives that the eldest son wouldn't have a wedding. In her mind, the eldest son is the most important, so she couldn't accept anything that didn't fit her beliefs. But again, my father-in-law came to our rescue. He said, "None of the relatives care about the wedding. They just see it as a chance to have a nice meal. After a while, they'll forget there wasn't a wedding." My father-in-law said, "If you decide not to have a wedding, that's fine." He was very kind and respected our decision, which saved us from being pressured into following my mother-in-law's old-fashioned ideas. However, my mother-in-law wasn't happy about it. So we got married without a wedding and started living on our own. I became a housewife to support my husband. I feel very happy doing housework and making lunch and dinner for him every day. I think it will be even more enjoyable when we have children someday. About 2 months after our marriage, my parents-in-law asked my husband if he would like to visit them. My husband and I had had some disagreements with my mother-in-law, so we were a little worried. But we hadn't visited their house since getting married, so we decided we should visit them. I was worried that my mother-in-law might try to bully me, but surprisingly, she didn't. In fact, she was very kind. "If you have any questions about being a housewife, you can always ask me," she said. "I have lots of recipes and I'll teach you everything I know." My mother-in-law loves to cook and often invites neighbors over for home parties, which she says are very popular. That day, I had a home-cooked meal prepared by my mother-in-law, and it was delicious. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law were very kind, and I realized I didn't need to worry as much as I had. My husband felt the same way and thought it would be fine to visit his parents once in a while. About 3 months later, my parents-in-law invited us to a dinner party at their house. Since our last visit had gone so well, we were happy to go. This time, my mother-in-law served food that looked like it came from an expensive restaurant. My husband even complimented her, saying, "You're getting better and better at cooking. You didn't make anything like this when I was a kid. This meal is really delicious. Thank you for preparing so many amazing dishes." My mother-in-law smiled happily when I thanked her and told me to eat a lot. I had a great time. But that night, I had a terrible stomachache. While I was sitting in the bathroom, I started feeling faint and weak. "Hey Elizabeth, are you okay?" I heard my husband's voice, but it faded away. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My husband had called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said they couldn't figure out what was wrong. It wasn't food poisoning or anything like that. I thought maybe there was too much olive oil in the pasta I had for lunch, but I never found out what caused it. After getting an IV drip and some rest, I started feeling better. My husband and I went home and went to bed. I couldn't understand what was going on, but I didn't have any more symptoms after that. However, 2 months later, the same thing happened again. Suddenly, I felt sick. The only thing that was the same as last time was that it happened after eating my mother-in-law's cooking at my in-laws' house. I wondered if my mother-in-law's food was spoiled, but my husband, who ate the same food, was completely fine. Then, a month later, it happened again after we had dinner at my in-laws' house. I invited a friend over for lunch to talk about why this kept happening to me. "Isn't that coming from stress?" she suggested. Her words made me a bit nervous. I thought I was being completely trusting and open-minded, but maybe I was feeling a bit anxious around my mother-in-law without realizing it. After all, I was getting sick every time we visited my in-laws' house, so my husband was worried too. He suggested that we stop visiting my parents-in-law's house for a while. I don't know the cause, but this always happens when we eat at my parents-in-law's house, he said. He thought it might have something to do with my mother-in-law's cooking. I wondered if that could really be the case. After that, my mother-in-law contacted my husband several times, inviting us to dinner. He always refused, thinking of me. But after a while, we got another invitation that we couldn't refuse. My brother-in-law and his wife were coming to my in-laws' house to give their wedding greetings. I felt a bit down because I had been feeling better by avoiding visits to my in-laws' house. My husband reassured me, saying I didn't have to eat much. So I decided to eat as little as possible. When the day of the party arrived, my mother-in-law was as kind as ever. As long as we talked normally, I didn't feel sick. I started to wonder if maybe there was something wrong with the food after all. A little later, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived, and we had a nice conversation with them. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was preparing the dishes with great skill, and more food was being laid out on the table. Her home-cooked meals looked as beautiful and delicious as ever. In fact, the food I had eaten before tasted really good, so I still couldn't understand why I was getting sick. As soon as we sat down, my mother-in-law encouraged me to eat. "Elizabeth, you said you liked this dish, didn't you?" she asked. "I made it very delicious today, so please try it," my mother-in-law said. I didn't know what to do. Then my husband stepped in and said Elizabeth isn't feeling well today, so let her eat only what she can when she can. But my mother-in-law responded, "Well then, this small amount should be fine, right?" She placed a small plate with less food in front of me. While I was unsure of what to do, my brother-in-law spoke up, "Elizabeth, if you're not feeling well, you don't have to force yourself. We've already greeted each other, so if you feel sick, don't hesitate to go home and rest." It seemed my husband had told his brother and sister-in-law about everything, and they were trying to help me. My mother-in-law realized she couldn't force me to eat her food, so she said, "Well then, I'll put it in a Tupperware for you to take home." I couldn't help but wonder why she was so eager for me to eat it. I figured that if I took the food home, I didn't have to eat it right away, so I said, "Okay, thank you very much." As my mother-in-law went to get the Tupperware, my father-in-law suddenly collapsed and fell off his chair. We all turned to look at him, and he was holding his stomach, clearly in a lot of pain. "What's wrong with you?" someone asked. He hadn't even touched the food on the table yet. Then my father-in-law said something surprising. "I just ate a little bit of food from the kitchen. Why is my stomach suddenly upset?" I did miss my mother-in-law's comment, "Did you eat some of that?" My husband immediately called an ambulance, and my mother-in-law went with my father-in-law to the hospital. We were all stunned, left at my in-laws' house. But I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother-in-law had said earlier. It seemed that my brother-in-law's wife had noticed something too. We started to wonder if there might be a secret in the kitchen. We decided to check the kitchen where my mother-in-law had been. We found something surprising. We then drove to the hospital where my father-in-law was taken. As soon as we got through the reception desk, we went to his room and heard voices inside. The doctor was asking my mother-in-law if she knew what was wrong with my father-in-law. She said she had no idea. When we entered the room, my mother-in-law looked flustered. "Oh, you guys came all the way here. It's all right. As long as I'm here, it will be fine," she said. But we weren't going to miss this chance. I told her I needed to talk to her and walked up to her, with my husband, my brother-in-law, and his wife following me. "What's going on with you guys?" I asked. My father-in-law's condition seemed to have stabilized and his color looked normal, but they still didn't know the cause. Apparently, he had been conscious for a while after arriving at the hospital and had gone to the bathroom several times. He became dehydrated and lost consciousness completely. I looked my mother-in-law straight in the eye, took something out of my bag, and showed it to her. When she saw it, she got upset. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. She replied, Well, what is it?" trying to act like she didn't know. "This is a laxative," I said. I found a lot of powdered laxatives in the kitchen. My mother-in-law fell silent. The doctor then said, "It seems he had these symptoms because he ingested a lot of laxatives. We'll run some tests to be sure. If we find laxative leaves, I'll need to ask him when he ingested them. If he doesn't know, it means someone must have given it to him intentionally, which would be a serious charge." Hearing this, my mother-in-law suddenly panicked. "No, it's not like that," she said. "I didn't try to make him eat that food. It was just negligence." My husband reacted strongly to what my mother-in-law said. "Who were you trying to feed that to?" he asked. My mother-in-law climbed up and said, "You're not going to let this go, so we'll have to call the police to investigate." When my husband said that, my mother-in-law admitted everything. It was all for Elizabeth. I was trying to punish her by feeding her laxatives. "What do you mean, punish me? What did I do to deserve this?" I asked. "Since my son married you, he's become a bad son. You didn't live with us and you didn't have a wedding. You persuaded him to do all of this, so you're my enemy." I told her, "That's just unjustified resentment." "Is that why you've been putting laxatives in my food? It wasn't just a little before. That's why I ended up in the emergency room. How can you say it was just a small amount?" My husband and brother-in-law agreed with me and blamed my mother-in-law. "I can't forgive you for what you did to Elizabeth," my husband said. "I'd be furious too if someone did this to my future wife." In response, my husband and brother-in-law declared that they were disowning my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law started to panic and begged my husband and brother-in-law not to disown her. Then my father-in-law, who had woken up and heard the whole conversation, spoke up. "You've done a terrible thing out of your ego. You should be arrested by the police. I'm so disappointed in you." Even as she pleaded, my father-in-law continued, "You're going to pay Elizabeth $30,000. Of course you'll have to work for it. I won't help you in any way." "No, it's impossible," she protested. "I've been a stay-at-home mom my whole life." "Shut up," he said. "If you don't agree to these terms, I'll divorce you immediately and report you to the police." My mother-in-law had no choice but to agree to work and pay me $30,000. Now she's working hard and paying me little by little. My father-in-law keeps a close eye on her to make sure she doesn't cheat, and all her salary goes towards this payment. She seems very overwhelmed, but I think she deserves it for what she did to me. Meanwhile, my husband and I are living happily. My husband and father-in-law have told me that I don't have to see my mother-in-law again. I feel much better now, knowing that with my husband and father-in-law by my side, I'll be okay no matter what happens. Feeding someone food containing laxatives is indeed a serious crime. It's shocking that a mother-in-law would do something like that so thoughtlessly. One might wonder why such a person was married to her father-in-law. But it seems that her two sons turned out well, so perhaps there was a time when she was different. Whatever the reasons, the punishment seems fair. I hope she works hard to pay the $30,000 to Elizabeth, and I wish Elizabeth and her husband a happy and peaceful life together.
"Bradley, since when do we drive luxury cars?" my mother-in-law Carol exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the sleek, black vehicle parked in their driveway. "Well, Nancy's parents insisted we use their car for today," Bradley replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. My parents stepped out, subtly flaunting their high-end wardrobes. I straightened my skirt and walked up to Carol. I could feel her eyes appraising me, not missing the tiniest detail. "Hi, Carol. It's good to see you." She gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nancy?" Bradley joined us, putting a comforting hand on my back. "Mom, Dad, this is Nancy's family, David and Susan. And this is Josh." "Nice to meet you," David said, extending his hand. Carol barely shook it, her eyes darting behind him. "So, what line of work are you in?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "I run a tech startup," David replied calmly, ignoring her disdain. "Interesting," she said, clearly uninterested. Her eyes flickered over to Bradley. "Why don't we go inside?" We all followed Carol into the house, where Jenna was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she muttered, "Oh, it's you guys." Bradley shot me an apologetic look. "Jenna, can you at least pretend to be hospitable?" Jenna shrugged. finally looking up and making eye contact with me. "Nancy, love the dress. Very vintage." "Thanks, Jenna," I replied, forcing a smile. Bradley's father, Robert, sauntered in, glancing at us like we were a disruption. "Bradley," he said, barely nodding in my direction. "Nancy." "Hey, Dad," Bradley responded. "This is Nancy's family." Robert acknowledged them with a cursory nod, then turned to Carol. "Shall we?" It was clear this gathering wasn't going to be a friendly family union. Carol led the way to the dining room, where a lavish brunch was laid out. My parents took their seats, doing their best to maintain a calm demeanor under the icy reception. As we sat down, Carol started talking about her latest charity event, her voice dripping with a sense of superiority. It was a grand affair. Only the elite of the city were invited, of course. "Sounds delightful," Susan chimed in, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'd love to hear more about it." Carol's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, I doubt it's anything you'd be interested in, dear." Fighting back the urge to roll my eyes, I focused on my plate. Bradley squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. "So, Josh, what do you do for a living?" Jenna asked, her tone surprisingly devoid of her usual sarcasm. "I work in international tech relations," he said, his tone casual but firm. "Oh," Jenna muttered, clearly not expecting a solid response. The rest of the brunch was filled with awkward pauses and forced small talk. Carol and Robert maintained their aloof demeanor, while Jenna alternated between half-hearted attempts at conversation and ignoring us altogether. As we finished up, Carol finally addressed Bradley directly. "So, what's the plan for the rest of the day?" "We thought we'd show Nancy's family around town," Bradley said, smiling at me. "Give them a taste of the local sights." Carol's eyebrows shot up. "Our town isn't exactly touristy." "I'm sure we'll manage," I interjected, trying to cut the tension. As we made our way outside, I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my shoulders. Bradley wrapped an arm around me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I sighed. "It's just, you know." He kissed my forehead. "I know, but we're in this together, remember?" His words warmed my heart. As we got back into the car, I glanced at my family. Their support was my armor, shielding me from the cold judgment of Bradley's family. Together, we'd get through this. The first family dinner at Bradley's parents' house was a night I'll never forget. Carol and Jenna had made their approval or lack thereof abundantly clear from the start. As we walked into their grand dining room, the chandelier sparkled overhead, illuminating the tension in the air. "Welcome, everyone," Carol said with a tight smile, the tone insincere. "Please, take a seat." My parents, David and Susan, exchanged wary glances before sitting down. I grabbed Bradley's hand, feeling his warmth steady me. "So, Nancy," Carol began as soon as we were seated, "how's your little project management job going?" "It's going well, thank you," I answered, maintaining my composure. "Project management," Jenna interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must be fulfilling." "It is," I responded, trying to keep my tone neutral. Dinner progressed with Carol and Jenna steering the conversation away from anything remotely balanced. Every compliment felt double-edged, every question loaded with judgment. "Nancy, have you ever considered improving your style a bit?" Jenna asked, eyeing my dress. "You know, something more like this?" She gestured to her own designer outfit. "I'm comfortable with how I dress," I said, smiling politely. "But thanks for the suggestion." Bradley's grip tightened around my hand again. He had warned me about his family's elitist attitudes, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. He tried to shift the conversation, but it was like steering a ship against a storm. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. It was one of Bradley's old friends, stopping by unexpectedly. Bradley excused himself to greet him, leaving me momentarily alone with his family. Carol took the opportunity. "Nancy, dear, I hope you realize how difficult it is for Bradley to adjust to your world. It must be quite the culture shock." "Actually, we're very happy together," I replied, refusing to engage with her baiting. Bradley soon returned and picked up on the hostile atmosphere instantly. "Did I miss anything?" he asked, eyes narrowing at his mother and sister. "Nothing of importance, dear," Carol said dismissively. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee. I sat between my parents, their presence a comforting anchor. Jenna's voice cut through the room. "It's fascinating, David, that you own a tech startup. Such a humble profession." David smiled. "Humbleness has its own rewards, Jenna. Not everything needs to be flaunted. Jenna scoffed, but David's calm demeanor didn't waver. Susan took my hand and whispered, "Remember, we're proud of you." Bradley noticed the tension mounting again and decided it was time to leave. "Well, it's getting late. Thank you for dinner, Mom." Carol barely acknowledged his gratitude. "Drive safely." We stood to leave, and I couldn't help but glance at Bradley's father, Robert. Throughout the evening he'd been silent, merely observing. As we stepped outside, Bradley paused, looking directly at me. "Nancy, I'm sorry for their behavior." "It's okay, Bradley," really, I assured him, squeezing his hand. "No, it's not," he said, determination in his voice. "We'll figure this out. Together." We drove home in silence, but the resolve in Bradley's grip around the steering wheel spoke volumes. As we pulled into the driveway, I knew that this wasn't over. Carol and Jenna's disdain had ignited something in us, something we would confront head-on. At home, once we were alone, Bradley took my hands in his. "We'll make them see, Nancy, I promise." I nodded, feeling the strength of his resolve merge with my own. Whatever it took, we would face this challenge together. Family was worth fighting for, and we were ready to fight. 3 weeks had passed since that disastrous dinner, but the biting remarks from Carol and Jenna hadn't ceased. If anything, they seemed to gain momentum. "Nancy, darling, why don't you join us for tea tomorrow?" Carol's voice trilled over the phone one afternoon. "We need to discuss the upcoming charity gala." I hesitated, but ultimately agreed, knowing it would be rude to decline. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Carol and Jenna at an upscale tea room, the aroma of freshly brewed tea doing little to soothe my nerves. Carol wasted no time. "Nancy, how do you plan to contribute to the auction? It's a vital part of our family's commitment to the community." I sipped my tea, steadying myself. "I've thought about offering some project management consulting hours. It's what I do best." Jenna snorted. "Do you really think anyone would bid on that? We need something elegant, something that represents our family's stature." "Perhaps Bradley and I could donate together. We both have skills to offer," I suggested, trying to navigate their pointed questioning. "That's not the point, Nancy," Carol interrupted, her eyes cold. "You need to understand that our family has certain standards. It's not just about money, it's about perception." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of subtle jabs and condescending remarks. By the time I left, my head was spinning. The next evening, I lay on the couch, exhausted. Bradley walked in, immediate concern on his face. "Rough day?" "Just another round with your mom and Jenna," I sighed. This time it was about the charity gala. He sat next to me, taking my hand. "Nancy, I know they're relentless, but I promise we'll get through this." A few days later, Bradley and I attended another family gathering. This time, Carol's disdain seemed to be in full force. She barely acknowledged us as we walked in, her focus immediately shifting to a conversation with her friends about exclusive vacations. "Oh, Bradley, Nancy," Jenna called out from the kitchen as we walked in. "Do come and join us." Her smile was anything but friendly as she handed me a glass of wine. "So, heard any more comments about your vintage style?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, yes. My boss said it's a great reflection of our company's creative spirit." Jenna's laugh was sharp. "Well, that's unique." Carol entered the room, her eyes scanning me like an appraising critic. "Nancy, dear, we've been meaning to talk about your role in the family business. Perhaps you should consider something more traditional." Bradley cut in sharply. "Mom, Nancy is perfectly content with her career. We've talked about this." Ignoring him, Carol continued, "You must admit, Bradley, that a more conventional path might benefit both of you in the long run." I felt my patience wearing thin. "Carol, I appreciate your concern, but Bradley and I are happy with our careers as they are." Bradley's support was unwavering. "We're building our life on our terms." The tension in the room was palpable. Jenna, sensing the rising conflict, attempted to steer the conversation. "Oh, enough about careers. Let's talk about our new country club membership, shall we?" Later that night, Bradley and I sat in our living room, the silence heavy between us. "Nancy, I hate seeing you go through this," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "We need to find a way to make them see us for who we are, not who they want us to be," I replied. "I know," Bradley sighed. "And I have an idea. We'll gather your family and come up with a plan. We'll show them that respect isn't bought with money. It's earned." I looked at him, relieved. "Thank you, Bradley. Your support means everything to me. He smiled, determination lighting his eyes. We'll face this together, Nancy, whatever it takes. The resolve we shared was a step in the right direction. With a renewed sense of purpose, we prepared ourselves for the battles yet to come, knowing that our love and unity were our strongest weapons. Weeks flew by, but the tension only grew thicker. Carol and Jenna's continual snide remarks were taking a toll on me. I started staying later at work, trying to avoid the venom at family gatherings. But of course, they found ways to ambush me at home. One evening, Bradley and I were finally relaxing when the doorbell rang. Bradley opened it, revealing Carol and Jenna, their faces set in tight smiles. "Surprise!" Carol sang, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. "We were just in the area and thought we'd drop by." Bradley's jaw tightened, but he managed a polite response. "Mom, Jenna, this isn't a great time. We were just winding down." "Oh, nonsense, dear." Carol dismissed him and plopped herself on our sofa. "We won't be long." Jenna sauntered to the kitchen, opening our fridge. "Do you have any sparkling water, Nancy? I can't drink tap." I forced a smile and handed her a bottle. "Here you go." Bradley shot me a glance as if to say, "Hang in there." "So, Nancy," Carol began in her usual patronizing tone, "are you still working those long hours? Seems quite demanding for a project manager." "It's fulfilling work, Carol," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Yes, well," she sniffed, "don't overwork yourself. Wouldn't want you burning out." Bradley jumped in. "Mom, Nancy knows what she's doing. Can we just have a pleasant evening?" Jenna, sipping her water, smirked. "You seem tense, Brad. Anything we can help with?" "No, Jenna," he bit back. "We're fine." They didn't stay long, but their visit left a bitter taste. Once they were gone, I slumped onto the couch, exhausted. Bradley sat beside me, rubbing my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Nancy. They just don't quit." "I know," I sighed. "We need to do something, Brad." The walls were closing in, the relentless harassment straining our bond. That weekend, Bradley decided to have a serious talk with his father. He hoped Robert might help curb Carol's and Jenna's behavior. We went to his parents' mansion, hopeful yet wary. Over coffee, Bradley broached the topic. "Dad, we need to talk about Mom and Jenna," Bradley began. "Their constant belittling of Nancy is unacceptable." Robert blinked, surprised. "Belittling? I'm sure they're just trying to help." "Help," Bradley demanded. "They're making things unbearable for Nancy. We can't continue like this." Robert frowned. "Bradley, our family maintains a certain standard. Maybe Nancy needs to adapt." My heart sank at his words. Bradley stood, furious. "Adapt? She's perfect as she is? Or can't you see value beyond your own prejudices?" "Watch your tone," Robert warned, standing up as well. "We've built this life through hard work and status. Maybe Nancy just needs to understand that." Bradley's face turned red with anger. "Dad, respect isn't about status. It's about how you treat people. If you can't see that, then you're blinder than I thought." He grabbed my hand, leading us out. "We're done here, Dad," he called back, not looking over his shoulder. Back in the car, Bradley's anger was palpable. "I'm sorry, Nancy. I hoped he'd understand." "It's all right, Brad," I said softly. "We'll find another way." Back at home, we sat with my family to devise a new plan. Determination fueled our thoughts, and we knew we had to stand our ground. If they wanted to judge us by their standards, we'd show them we could match them, and more. We'd face their snobbery head-on, with intelligence and dignity. As the evening wore on, a sense of camaraderie filled the room. We were ready to confront the in-laws' arrogance, knowing that true respect and love were worth fighting for. Whatever it took, we would reclaim our peace. The plan was simple, yet bold. My family was on board, ready to show Carol and Jenna that their arrogance couldn't crush our spirit. We plotted carefully, every detail considered for maximum impact. One evening, while sipping coffee around our kitchen table, I brought it up. "We'll need a car, something that screams luxury. Dad, do you still have connections with that car rental place?" David grinned. "I'll handle it. Consider it done." Susan chimed in, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "And we can spruce up our wardrobes. There's an upscale boutique downtown. Let's turn some heads." Josh, my brother, leaned back casually. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. I think Jenna will be quite surprised to see how we handle things." The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. We visited the boutique and picked out outfits that oozed sophistication. David secured the car, a stunning Bentley that would make even Carol do a double take. Come D-Day, we gathered at our place, reviewing the plan one last time. Everyone ready? Bradley asked, his voice steady but eyes burning with resolve. Ready, we echoed. We arrived at Carol and Robert's mansion just as a crowd was gathering for their latest event. Heads turned as we pulled up in the Bentley, my family stepping out one by one looking impeccable. Carol spotted us first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed suspiciously. Nancy, Bradley, what an unexpected surprise. Her tone was brittle. Mom, Dad, Jenna, Bradley said, his voice firm. We thought we'd join you tonight and introduce Nancy's family. Jenna sauntered over, her smirk faltering as she took in our attire. David, Susan, Josh, she greeted, her tone failing to conceal her confusion. You look different. David stepped forward, smiling warmly. We wanted to make a good impression. The evening continued, and whispers buzzed around us. Carol and Jenna's friends were clearly intrigued, but our performance was far from over. During dinner, the conversation shifted to business. Jenna couldn't resist a jab. David, remind us again what you do? With a casual air, David replied, Oh, I run a tech startup. We've had a few breakthroughs lately. Carol raised an eyebrow. Breakthroughs? Yes, he continued. We developed a new software that major companies are scrambling to license. Humble beginnings, but it's taken off. Jenna's facade cracked. Tech. Interesting. Josh, ever the charmer, leaned forward. Actually, I've been helping expand our international relations. It's quite fulfilling. The room buzzed with their replies, curiosity growing by the second. Carol's mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. Well, that's impressive. Bradley's lips twitched in a restrained smile. You see, Mom, Dad, there's more to people than just appearances. Robert, silent thus far, finally spoke. Indeed, it appears we've underestimated your family, Nancy. His tone was less condescending, more reflective. But the crown jewel came when David stood up for a final toast. To family and understanding, and to knowing that real respect isn't bought, it's earned. As he spoke, it was clear, the in-laws' materialistic facade was crumbling. The room's atmosphere shifted, respect and humility slowly creeping in. Later, Bradley and I stood outside, the cool night air refreshing. That was incredible, Bradley said, his eyes glowing with pride. We showed them, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in months. They won't forget this, he added, wrapping his arm around me. No, they won't, I agreed. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally learn what really matters. As we drove away in the Bentley, my heart swelled with hope. For the first time, it felt like we were truly seen. And that was a victory we'd cherish, long after the headlights dimmed. We decided to keep the momentum going. Our next appearance at Carol and Robert's house was going to be even more unforgettable. This time, we arrived in a Rolls-Royce, causing another wave of shock among the guests. As we stepped out, I felt a thrill of anticipation. Carol and Jenna met us at the door, their expressions a mix of surprise and skepticism. Good evening, Carol, Jenna, I greeted, keeping my voice steady but confident. What an entrance, Jenna said, barely masking her irritation. Is this another one of your parents' cars? David stepped in smoothly. Indeed, we thought it fitting for the occasion. Once inside, everyone's eyes were on us. Carol tried to regain control, her smile strained. Nancy, shall we talk in private? Bradley's grip on my hand tightened. Whatever you have to say to Nancy, you can say in front of everyone. Carol's eyes flashed with anger. Very well, Nancy, I hope you understand that appearances can be deceiving. It's easy to put on a show, but we are concerned with what's underneath. I met her gaze head on. Our appearance tonight is not a show. It's a reflection of who we are and what we are capable of. We've worked hard, just like you. Carol's lips tightened. Hard work is important, yes, but so is knowing one's place. Bradley stepped forward. Mom, Nancy's family deserves respect. They've earned everything they have. Isn't that what our family values? Robert's voice cut through the tension. Carol, we've misjudged them. It's time we acknowledge that. Carol seemed taken aback for a moment, then rallied. Acknowledged what? That they can rent fancy cars and wear designer clothes? This does not change who they fundamentally are. David, calm and dignified, addressed the room. Our success is real, as is our integrity. We have always believed in respect, something this family seems to have overlooked. A murmur ran through the guests. Jenna, sensing a loss of control, whispered loudly to Carol, Are we seriously entertaining this farce? Bradley, his voice unwavering, said, It's not a farce. Look around, Jenna. These are the people you've belittled, yet they stand strong. They deserve your respect. The silence that followed was profound. Carol's face was red with suppressed rage, but she remained silent. Bradley continued, "We've done nothing but prove ourselves while being constantly underestimated and disrespected." Josh chose this moment to speak, his tone casual but cutting. Respect should flow both ways. You can't claim to be superior while putting others down. It's not just hypocritical, it's shallow. Carol's mask slipped. "You dare speak to me like that?" "Yes," Josh said simply, "because you need to hear it." We stood there, defiant and united, the weight of their judgments crumbling around us. Bradley turned to his father. "Dad, will you continue to support this?" Robert, for once, looked uncertain. "Things do need to change," he finally admitted. Carol glared at her husband, but refrained from speaking. I knew we'd struck a chord. This had been more than an event. It was a shift in the dynamic that had oppressed us for too long. As we left, Carol and Jenna's faces were etched with the realization that their power had waned. Bradley held my hand tightly, pride and relief mingling in his eyes. "We did it," he whispered. "Yes, we did," I agreed, feeling victory surge within me. Driving away, the sense of unity and triumph was palpable. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our self-worth. We had challenged their scorn and stood our ground. For the first time, I felt free. Bradley's support and my family's unwavering strength had seen us through. Respect, real respect, was earned, and tonight we had taken a giant step forward in demanding ours. The day of the grand reveal had finally arrived. We assembled early at Bradley's parents' house, ready to host another gathering. This time, my father's success would be the centerpiece, revealing a side Carol and Jenna had never bothered to see. Carol's jaw visibly tightened when she saw the turnout. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, and our family blended in seamlessly. This wasn't just an impression, it was a statement. As we gathered in the sprawling living room, Dad cleared his throat, capturing everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming. I'd like to share a bit about our journey. Our humble beginnings shaped who we are, but they never defined our ceiling." The room fell silent, all eyes on him, Carol's included. She seemed unable to reconcile her preconceived notions with the reality before her. David continued, "Our company, though rooted in simplicity, has earned respect in tech circles. We value innovation and hard work over ostentation." Jenna rolled her eyes, but her smirk was less confident. "You mean you've been successful all this time and chose not to flaunt it?" "Correct," David replied calmly. "We believe in letting actions speak louder than appearances." Josh took this moment to step in. "For example, our latest project has secured multiple international contracts. We're about to expand significantly." Jenna's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked it with indifference. "As for me," David added, "I prefer staying grounded. My joy comes from seeing my family thrive, not from displaying wealth." The sincerity in his words was impossible to ignore. Carol shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking up. "Why haven't you mentioned this before?" "Maybe because you never asked," I replied softly, but with conviction. Bradley joined my side, his support unwavering. "Mom, Dad, it's not about money, it's about respect, something I hope you start to understand." Carol's face was flushed with emotion. We never meant any harm. We just wanted the best for our son." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "The best? By hurting the woman I love? By belittling her family?" Robert quietly interjected. "We might have been blinded by our own standards. It's clear we need to reconsider our approach." Jenna, sensing an opportunity, tried to reconcile. "Nancy, maybe we misjudged you. Perhaps it's time we tried harder to understand each other." I looked at her and for the first time saw a glimmer of sincerity. That would be a start. The room seemed lighter, the oppressive air lifting. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Carol and Jenna needed time to change, but the seeds had been planted. David lifted his glass. "To new beginnings and mutual respect." Everyone raised their glasses, even Carol and Jenna, albeit slowly. The clinking of glasses solidified a tentative peace, one built on new understandings rather than forced agreements. Later, as we headed back to our car, Bradley wrapped his arm around me. "Do you think they'll change?" "I think they'll try," I said, leaning into him. "And that's a start." Driving away, I felt a cautious optimism. The battles of words and pride had taken their toll, but they also cleared paths for potential reconciliation. Bradley and I had faced the storm together, and now we might just be heading toward clearer skies. At home, we sat in the quiet of our living room processing what had unfolded. "Whatever comes next," Bradley said softly, "we face it together." I smiled, feeling a renewed strength. Together. With that, we had not only fought for respect, but had shown that real strength lies in unity and understanding. Whatever the future held, we were ready to face it, side by side. Months passed, and gradually, life took on a new rhythm. Carol and Jenna weren't transformed overnight, but there were changes. Small, yet significant. Our encounters were less strained, and the biting remarks that once filled the air had softened. One sunny afternoon, Bradley and I hosted a barbecue at our place. It was a casual gathering, aimed at bringing both families together. As the smell of grilled food filled the air, David and Robert chatted about tech developments while Josh and Jenna discussed international markets, surprisingly finding common ground. Carol approached me near the grill, a plate of marinated vegetables in her hands. "Mind if I add these?" she asked. "Of course not," I smiled, stepping aside to make space. After a moment of silence, she began, "Nancy, I've been thinking about everything. The events, the revelations, you've shown us a different perspective." I turned to face her, genuinely curious. "And," with a deep breath she continued, "and I realize we've been unfair, judgmental. Bradley loves you, and that should have been enough for us." Her admission was unexpected. "Thank you, Carol. It means a lot to hear you say that." She nodded, her face softening. "It's about time I started treating you like family." We spent the rest of the afternoon in relative peace, the atmosphere light and friendly. Bradley, noticing the change, wrapped his arm around me. "Looks like we're finally getting somewhere." "It feels good," I admitted. "Really good." Towards the evening, as the sky turned golden, David gathered everyone for a toast. "To family, understanding, and new beginnings," he said, lifting his glass. "To new beginnings," everyone echoed, the clink of glasses sealing the sentiment. Even Carol and Jenna seemed genuine in their response. Later, as everyone began to leave, Carol approached us. "Bradley, Nancy," she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Thank you for giving us a chance to understand. We still have a lot to learn, but I promise we're trying." Bradley hugged his mom, a rare moment of vulnerability. "Thanks, Mom. That means the world to us." As the last of the guests drove away, Bradley and I stood in the quiet of our backyard, the remnants of the day glowing warmly around us. "Did today really happen?" I asked, almost in disbelief. "It did," Bradley smiled, "and I think it's just the start." The weeks that followed brought more small but meaningful changes. Carol called me more often, asking for my opinion on family matters. Jenna, though still maintaining her sharp demeanor, began showing glimpses of sincerity. One evening, Bradley and I sat on our porch, reflecting on the journey. "Remember when we said we'd face this together?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. "And we did." He kissed the top of my head. "I'm so proud of us, proud of you." "Thank you, Bradley, for standing by me through everything." "No thanks needed," he said softly. "You're my world." As the stars appeared one by one, a sense of peace settled over us. The drama and conflict had given way to a new understanding, a stronger bond. Our relationship, tested by trials, had emerged fortified and unshakable. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on mutual respect and unwavering support. We had faced the storm, and now we were enjoying the calm, ready to face whatever the future held. Together, just as we'd promised. "Mom, we need to leave. Now," I said, voice trembling. The words tumbled out before I could stop them, my heart pounding with a sense of dread that had become all too familiar. "Honestly, Claire, I can't deal with your nonsense right now," she sighed, not even glancing up from her magazine. "You're always overreacting about something." I swallowed hard, the dismissal stinging as it always did. From as far back as I could remember, I'd had these inexplicable gut feelings, warnings that would scream at me to avoid certain situations or people. More often than not, they proved to be accurate, like the time I insisted we leave a restaurant only for a horrific kitchen fire to break out minutes later. Or when I pleaded with Mom to take a different route home, and we narrowly missed a multi-car pileup. But instead of being praised for my intuition, I was labeled as a troublemaker, a jinx. My parents brushed off my concerns, chalking them up to an overactive imagination or attention-seeking behavior. The only one who seemed to understand was my little sister Julia, who would cling to me whenever I sensed danger, her big eyes wide with trust. That trust slowly eroded as we grew older. With each passing year, the rift between Julia and me widened, fueled by our parents' blatant favoritism. While I was constantly criticized for my oddness, Julia could do no wrong in their eyes. She was the golden child, showered with affection and opportunities that I could only dream of. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom snapped, jolting me back to the present. "We're not going anywhere. Your sister has an important dance recital tonight, and we're not missing it because of your silly premonitions." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. It was no use. They never listened, no matter how dire the situation. With a heavy heart, I retreated to my room, the feeling of dread growing stronger with every step. Little did I know, that night would be the beginning of a downward spiral, one that would test the limits of my family's loyalty and push me to the brink of losing everything, including myself. High school should have been a fresh start, a chance to shed the labels that had followed me for years. Instead, the neglect from my parents only intensified, and the chasm between Julia and me grew wider with each passing day. "Did you see Julia's new outfit?" Mom gushed one morning over breakfast. "She looks absolutely stunning." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy that twisted my gut. Of course, they had splurged on yet another designer ensemble for their precious daughter. "And her dance recital is this weekend," Dad chimed in, beaming with pride. "We can't wait to see her perform." The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. They couldn't care less about my activities or accomplishments. Not that I had many to speak of. My parents had made sure of that, constantly shooting down any interests or hobbies I tried to pursue. "What about you, Claire?" Mom asked, almost as an afterthought. "Anything exciting happening in your life?" I opened my mouth, but the words died on my lips. What was the point? They would only dismiss or criticize whatever I said, as usual. "No, nothing," I mumbled, staring down at my half-eaten breakfast. Julia shot me a smug grin from across the table, her perfect features twisted into a look of pure disdain. She knew she held all the power, basking in our parents' endless adoration while I withered in her shadow. The months ticked by and the pattern repeated itself endlessly. Julia blossomed into a popular, confident young woman, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers and drowning in praise from our parents. Meanwhile, I faded into the background, my warnings and concerns falling on deaf ears. "Claire, you're being ridiculous," Mom would scoff whenever I tried to voice my intuition. "Stop trying to rain on your sister's parade." The words cut deep, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a jinx, a burden to be brushed aside. Even Julia started to treat me with disdain, rolling her eyes whenever I opened my mouth. "No one wants to hear your crazy theories, weirdo," she sneered one day, her friends giggling behind her. I bit my tongue, swallowing the hurt and anger that threatened to spill out. What was the point of fighting back? They had already made up their minds about me. As the years passed, the isolation became suffocating. I watched from the sidelines as Julia's star continued to rise, her every whim catered to by our doting parents. They were blind to her true nature, the vicious jealousy that simmered beneath her perfect facade. Little did they know that jealousy would soon boil over, igniting a chain of events that would tear our family apart and force me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. The day Julia got scouted by the prestigious Westbrook Dance Academy should have been a celebratory occasion, but as soon as I laid eyes on the slick-haired recruiter, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "This is such an amazing opportunity," Mom gushed, her eyes shining with pride. "Julia is going to be a star." "I don't know," I began, but Dad cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't start with your negativity, Claire," he snapped. "For once, can't you just be happy for your sister?" I bit my tongue, the familiar taste of bitter resignation flooding my mouth. Of course, they wouldn't listen to my concerns, not when it came to their golden child. Over the next few weeks, the feeling of dread only intensified. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off about Westbrook, that their promises of fame and fortune were too good to be true. "Julia, please be careful," I pleaded one night as she packed her dance bag. I have a really bad feeling about this place. She whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. Shut up, Claire. You're just jealous that I actually have talent and a future unlike you. The words stung, but I pressed on, desperate to make her understand. I'm serious. Those people seem shady, and I don't want you to get hurt. Julia let out a derisive laugh. Oh my God, you're delusional. Stay out of my business, freak. With that, she stormed out, leaving me alone with my mounting sense of dread. Sure enough, my worst fears were realized. Within weeks, the truth about Westbrook began to unravel. They were nothing more than a glorified exploitation ring, luring in talented students with promises of stardom, only to bleed their families dry with exorbitant fees and shady contracts. How could you let this happen? Dad raged, his face contorted with anger. You jinxed this opportunity for your sister. I tried to warn you, I pleaded, my voice trembling, but none of you would listen to me. Mom shook her head, her lips curled in disgust. This is all your fault, Claire. If you hadn't been so negative and discouraging, none of this would have happened. The words cut deeper than any knife, reinforcing the belief that I was nothing more than a burden, a blight on their perfect family. As the financial strain mounted, the tension in our household became unbearable. Julia grew increasingly resentful, her once bright future now tarnished by the failures of Westbrook. I hate you, she hissed one night, her eyes burning with rage. You've ruined everything for me, just like you always do. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see reason. But deep down, I knew it was pointless. In their eyes, I would always be the problem, the one to blame for every misfortune that befell our family. As the walls closed in around me, I found myself retreating further and further into a world of isolation, my only solace, the knowledge that I had tried to prevent this catastrophe. But even that small comfort was overshadowed by the growing realization that my family's love and loyalty had limits, and I had long since exceeded them. As the walls of isolation closed in around me, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of Mrs. Reynolds, my English teacher. From the moment I stepped into her class, I sensed something different about her, a quiet understanding that seemed to radiate from her kind eyes. Claire, can I speak with you for a moment? She asked one day after class, a warm smile playing across her lips. I nodded warily, bracing myself for yet another adult who would dismiss or belittle me. But Mrs. Reynolds surprised me. I can't help but notice the way you carry yourself, she began, her voice gentle. It's almost like you're shouldering a weight that no one else can see. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered brushing her off like I had so many others. But there was something about her demeanor, something that made me want to trust her. It's complicated, I finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have these feelings, these gut instincts that something bad is going to happen. And no matter how hard I try to warn people, they never listen. To my surprise, Mrs. Reynolds didn't laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I understand more than you know, Claire, she murmured. You see, I have a similar gift, a heightened sense of empathy that allows me to read people's emotions and intentions. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Could it be possible that I wasn't alone, that there was someone else out there who understood what I was going through? Over the following weeks, Mrs. Reynolds became my mentor, guiding me through the intricacies of my abilities and helping me to embrace them as a strength rather than a curse. Your intuition is a powerful tool, she explained one day, but it's up to you to learn how to wield it wisely. With her guidance, I began to see the world through a new lens. The constant barrage of emotions and premonitions that had once overwhelmed me became manageable, even helpful. I started using my gift to assist friends and classmates, offering advice and warnings that were met with gratitude rather than scorn. How did you know that Kyle was cheating on me? My friend Sarah asked in amazement after I confronted her about her boyfriend's infidelity. You're like a human lie detector. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and appreciated for who I truly was. The isolation that had once suffocated me began to fade, replaced by a newfound confidence and sense of purpose. But as my star rose, Julia's jealousy reached new heights. She sneered at my newfound popularity, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment. Of course the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight. she spat one day, her words dripping with venom. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my abilities weren't a ploy for attention, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her own fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. As the tension between us escalated, I found myself caught in the crosshairs of a battle I never asked to be a part of. A battle for love, acceptance, and the right to be seen for who I truly was. Emboldened by Mrs. Reynolds' mentorship, I stepped out of the shadows and into a newfound confidence. No longer would I cower in fear of my abilities or allow others to dismiss them as mere delusions. "Claire, you have to help me," Sarah pleaded one day, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Kyle's been acting so strange lately, and I think he might be cheating on me." In the past, I would have hesitated, afraid of overstepping boundaries or being labeled a freak for voicing my suspicions. But now, I trusted my instincts implicitly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," I said gently, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "But I've sensed something off about Kyle for a while now. His emotions towards you have shifted, and I don't think he's being faithful." Sarah's face crumpled, but she nodded, grateful for my honesty. Word of my unique insights spread quickly, and soon more and more of my classmates were seeking me out for guidance. "Claire, you have to tell me if Brad is serious about me or just stringing me along," Amanda begged, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I closed my eyes, tuning into the emotional currents that swirled around us. "He cares for you, Amanda," I said carefully, "but he's not ready for the level of commitment you're looking for." As the requests poured in, I found myself embracing a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, my abilities were being valued, not shunned or ridiculed. But not everyone was thrilled by my newfound popularity. Julia's jealousy reached a fever pitch, her once adoring gaze now twisted with resentment and bitterness. Of course, the freak would find a way to steal the spotlight. She sneered one day as I offered advice to a group of classmates. I tried to reason with her, to explain that my intentions were pure, but she wouldn't hear it. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a threat to her fragile ego, a constant reminder of her failures and our parents' misplaced loyalty. "You're just jealous that people actually appreciate me for once," I shot back, my own frustration boiling over. Julia's face contorted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might strike me. Instead, she leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom. "Enjoy your little moment in the sun, Claire," she hissed, "because I'm going to make sure it doesn't last." From that day on, the battle lines were drawn. Julia made it her personal mission to undermine me at every turn, spreading rumors and lies in a desperate attempt to claw back the attention she so desperately craved. But for once, her efforts were futile. My newfound confidence was unshakable, bolstered by the knowledge that I was finally using my abilities to help those around me. As the tension between us reached a boiling point, I couldn't help but wonder if our toxic sibling rivalry would ever be resolved, or if it was destined to consume us both in a blaze of jealousy and resentment. "You seriously think you deserve a seat here, Claire?" Julia smirked as I took my place at the family table for her wedding reception. The venom in her voice sent a chill down my spine, but I refused to back down. Not this time. "Of course she does," Mom chided, though her tone lacked any real conviction. "She's part of the family." Julia let out a derisive laugh. "Barely. We all know you've never really accepted her gifts." She made air quotes with her perfectly manicured fingers. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Julia, this is outrageous. Leave your sister alone, or I'll have you removed from your own wedding." I whipped around to see none other than Mr. Anderson, the father of one of my closest friends, striding towards our table. His stern gaze swept over Julia and her new husband, Rick, leaving no doubt as to his distaste for their behavior. "Mr. Anderson," I stammered, equal parts relieved and mortified that he had witnessed Julia's cruelty. "You didn't have to." "Nonsense, Claire," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "I would be remiss if I didn't speak up in defense of someone who has done so much for my family and this community." Julia's face flushed a deep crimson, her carefully crafted facade of perfection cracking ever so slightly. Rick, meanwhile, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. "What are you talking about?" Mom demanded, her eyes narrowing at Mr. Anderson. He smiled, seemingly unperturbed by her hostility. Claire's unique abilities have been invaluable to my business ventures. Her insights and intuition have helped me navigate countless difficult decisions and partnerships, saving me from potential disasters time and time again. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, mixed with a twinge of guilt for not sharing these accomplishments with my family sooner. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't have mattered. They were too blinded by their favoritism towards Julia to ever truly appreciate my gifts. "Is this true, Claire?" Dad asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I nodded, holding Mr. Anderson's supportive gaze. "It is, but I never wanted to make a big deal out of it. I was just trying to help where I could." Julia's face twisted into an ugly sneer, her carefully curated mask of perfection shattering completely. "Of course," she spat, "always the martyr trying to make me look bad." "That's enough, Julia," Mr. Anderson said firmly. "Your pettiness and jealousy towards your sister have gone too far. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." With those words, he turned to address the assembled guests, his voice ringing out clear and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news to share about the bride and groom." As Mr. Anderson proceeded to lay bare the sordid details of Rick's shady past and Julia's manipulative behavior, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. For too long, I had been the scapegoat, the outcast forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction. But in that moment, the tables had turned. Julia's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, exposing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath the surface for years. And as the gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd, I knew that this was only the beginning, the first step towards reclaiming my rightful place in a family that had long since abandoned me. As Mr. Anderson's damning revelations about Rick and Julia's sordid behavior echoed through the stunned silence of the reception hall, I could practically feel the weight of years of mistreatment and neglect lifting from my shoulders. "Rick Thompson is nothing more than a con man, preying on wealthy families like yours to fund his lavish lifestyle," Mr. Anderson declared, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "And your daughter Julia was all too willing to be his accomplice, manipulating and deceiving everyone around her in pursuit of money and status." Julia's face had drained of all color, her perfect veneer cracking further with each word. Rick, meanwhile, seemed to shrink in on himself, the bravado he once exuded now replaced by a palpable sense of shame and fear. "You're lying," Julia shrieked, her voice shrill with desperation. "Rick loves me, and we're going to be so happy together." Mr. Anderson fixed her with a withering stare. "Wake up, Julia. The only thing Rick loves is your family's money. He's been using you from the start, and you were too blinded by your own greed and desire for validation to see it." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a torrent of hushed whispers and pointed stares. For the first time in my life, the tables had turned. Julia was the one being ostracized, her carefully cultivated image of perfection crumbling before our very eyes. "And as for you," Mr. Anderson continued, turning his steely gaze towards my stunned parents, "you should be ashamed of yourselves for enabling Julia's behavior and alienating Claire in the process." Mom opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Anderson held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen firsthand how you've dismissed and belittled Claire's gifts, treating her like a pariah while showering Julia with endless praise and attention. Well, no more." He gestured towards me, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Claire is an extraordinary young woman whose talents and insights have helped countless people, myself included. She deserves to be celebrated, not shunned by her own family." As his words washed over me, I felt a surge of emotion. Gratitude, vindication, and yes, a twinge of petty satisfaction at seeing Julia's carefully constructed facade finally shattered beyond repair. For years, I had been the outcast, the black sheep forced to bear the brunt of my family's dysfunction and cruelty. But in that moment, the tides had turned, and it was Julia who found herself on the outside looking in, her mask of perfection stripped away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. As the stunned silence gave way to a cacophony of whispers and murmurs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Finally, after years of suffering in silence, the truth was laid bare for all to see, and Julia had no one to blame but herself. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and held my head high, basking in the knowledge that my long journey towards redemption and acceptance was finally within reach. The path ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. I would never again allow myself to be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others. From this moment on, I would forge my own destiny, unburdened by the weight of my family's toxic legacy. The weight of the past fell away as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, my meager belongings tucked into a battered suitcase. The door closed behind me with a decisive click, severing the final ties to the toxic environment that had once been my home. As I made my way down the familiar street, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me to this point. The years of neglect and emotional abuse at the hands of my own family, the constant dismissal of my gifts, the unbearable strain of living in Julia's shadow, it all seemed like a distant nightmare, one that I had finally awakened from. The events of Julia's disastrous wedding had been the catalyst, the tipping point that had finally forced me to confront the harsh realities I had spent so long trying to ignore. With Mr. Anderson's support and my newfound confidence, I had mustered the strength to break free from the toxic cycle of manipulation and cruelty that had defined my relationship with my family for far too long. The confrontation had been explosive, a maelstrom of bitter accusations and long-festering resentments finally unleashed. Julia, of course, had been utterly unrepentant, hurling vicious insults and denials even as the evidence of her misdeeds mounted. "You're just jealous that I'm the one who's actually successful and happy," she had spat, her perfect facade now shattered beyond repair. Mom and Dad, meanwhile, had retreated into a defensive silence, their blind loyalty to Julia rendering them incapable of acknowledging the truth that had been laid bare before them. In the end, it had been a lost cause, a family so poisoned by dysfunction and favoritism that they were beyond redemption. And so, with a heavy heart, I had made the decision to walk away, to forge my own path and leave the toxic remnants of my past behind. As I navigated the familiar streets, each step felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The future stretched out before me, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with new experiences and possibilities. A small smile tugged at my lips as I thought of Mrs. Reynolds, the woman who had seen my gifts for what they truly were. Not a curse, but a rare and precious talent to be nurtured and embraced. She had promised to help me find my footing, to connect me with others who understood the complexities of empathic abilities. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging, of being seen and accepted for who I truly was. No longer would I be defined by the cruelty and pettiness of others, but by my own strength and resilience. As I turned the corner, the rising sun cast a warm glow over the city, bathing the world in a soft golden light. It felt like a fitting metaphor for the new chapter unfolding before me, a chance to step out of the shadows and into a future filled with potential and possibility. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and pressed onward, the past finally receding into the distance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was no longer alone in this world. For the first time in my life, I was free to embrace my gifts, to forge my own destiny, and to leave the toxic legacy of my family behind once and for all. "I can't believe you're still here. Why haven't you packed your bags yet?" Kyle's voice boomed through the kitchen, his sharp words echoing off the tiled walls. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, fighting the urge to snap back. "Because this is my home too, Kyle. I'm not leaving just because you bark orders," I responded, keeping my voice steady. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Jenna. I can send you packing anytime I want." Funny, I thought I had a say in my own life. I bit back anger, not wanting our 7-year-old son, Evan, to hear us fight again. He was in his room, probably trying to tune out our voices by burying himself in his toys. I turned away from Kyle, focusing on the streaked window above the sink. The yard outside, with its overgrown grass and forgotten swing set, was a far cry from the loving home I'd once dreamed of. The clinking of plates was all the response I gave him. He scoffed and stormed out, but his words lingered like a bad smell. Later, I found myself on the phone with my brother Logan. He was in his early 40s, always the solid rock in my life. "Logan, Do you have a minute? I asked, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes. Always for you, sis. What's going on? It's Kyle. Again, he keeps pushing me to leave. I don't know how much more I can take. Logan's sigh crackled through the line. Why don't you just come here for a while? Bring Evan. Get away from him. I wish it were that easy, I said, glancing at the clock. It was close to dinner. You know how he is. He won't let me go that easy. Besides, there's Clara to deal with, too. Ah, the ever-dramatic Clara, Logan muttered. I swear she lives to make my life hell. She's been staying here more often, criticizing everything from my cooking to how I parent Evan. Logan's voice turned serious. You deserve better than this, Jenna. So does Evan. Just remember that. I swallowed the lump in my throat and thanked him. Placing the phone back on the counter, I pondered if things would ever change. A tear escaped down my cheek as Clara's words from this morning rang in my memory. You call this a clean house, Jenna? I can see dust everywhere, and Evan's room is a disaster. I glanced around. It wasn't messy, just lived in, but Clara's version of clean was impossible to achieve with a child around. Evan emerged from his room, rubbing his eyes. Mom, can we have spaghetti tonight? I smiled and ruffled his hair. Sure thing, buddy. Go wash up. As I boiled water, I heard Clara's footsteps. Her perfume announced her presence before she spoke. Jenna, I need you to organize a reunion for my birthday, a big celebration with the family. And yes, it will be on your dime. My grip on the spoon tightened. Of course, Clara. Anything else? She smirked. Just try not to embarrass us again. I felt my anger bubbling beneath a mask of compliance. I'll make sure everything is perfect. Good. I'll expect nothing less. She drifted away, leaving a trail of condescension. I owed her nothing, but found myself trapped, again and again, in her web. That night, after putting Evan to bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind churning. It was clear now. If I stayed passive, Clara and Kyle would drain every ounce of happiness from me. I had to be strong, not just for me, but for Evan. Maybe I couldn't leave just yet, but I could start planning my way out. Their control had to end, and I would be the one to break free. I switched off the lamp by my bedside, the darkness covering the grimly determined smile on my face. Tomorrow, I would take the first step. Because this was no longer just about survival. It was about making them pay for every wound, every scar. I awoke the next morning to the sound of the front door slamming. Kyle was already gone. Probably off to some meeting that he'd cobbled together to look busy. I got up and started my usual routine, putting on a pot of coffee and preparing breakfast for Evan. Mom, can I have pancakes today? Evan asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. Sure thing, buddy. Pancakes it is, I said, smiling at him. As I flipped the pancakes, my mind drifted to the conversation with Logan last night. Just as I placed a plate in front of Evan, Clara walked in, her expression as sour as ever. She took one look at the pancakes and shook her head disapprovingly. Pancakes again? You should be giving him something healthier, Clara sneered, taking a seat at the table. Good morning to you too, Clara, I replied, my voice level. Morning, she said curtly before turning to Evan. Your mother should make you oatmeal. It's much better for you. Evan looked confused, glancing between us. I like pancakes, Grandma. Clara huffed, but before she could retort, the phone rang. I picked it up. Jenna, it's Emily. I heard about the reunion. Do you need help planning it? Her voice was warm and understanding. My grip on the phone softened. Yeah, that would be great, Emily. Thank you. We made plans to meet up later that day to go over the details. The thought of seeing Emily lifted my spirits a bit. She always knew how to make me feel better. After walking Evan to the bus stop, I headed to Emily's office. She greeted me with a hug. Let's get you some coffee, Emily said, leading me to her cozy office. We sat down and I poured out the whole story. Kyle's threats, Clara's insults, the forced reunion. Emily listened, her face a mask of concern. Jenna, you're stronger than you think. We'll make this reunion, but on your terms. We spent the next hour brainstorming. Emily's ideas were brilliant. She suggested ways to subtly sabotage the reunion, making it seem like everything was perfect on the surface while slowly exposing the cracks underneath. That's genius, I said, feeling a strange sense of empowerment. It's what friends are for. We'll show them who's really in charge, Emily said, her eyes gleaming with determination. When I returned home, Clara was waiting in the living room, her sharp eyes narrowing as I entered. Where have you been? This house isn't going to clean itself, she snapped. I was meeting with Emily to plan your reunion, I said, keeping my voice calm. Well, make sure it's done right, and remember, no expenses spared. I want this to be remembered, Clara demanded, as if she were the queen, and I, her lowly subject. Of course, Clara. It will be unforgettable, I replied, and I meant every word. As Clara strutted away, I clutched my phone, ready to text Emily. The plan was starting to take shape. That evening, as I tucked Evan in, he looked up at me and said, "Will you be at the reunion too, Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart, I will, but it's just a party for adults, so you won't have to worry about it," I assured him, brushing back his hair. "Okay, I just don't like it when Grandma makes you sad," he said softly. I kissed his forehead. "Don't worry about that, Evan. Things are going to get better." As I closed his door, I realized that my battle wasn't just for me. It was for Evan, too. Protecting him from the toxic web Clara and Kyle had spun was as important as breaking free myself. The next few days, I worked with Emily on the reunion plans while maintaining a facade of obedience at home. With every snide comment from Clara, with every dismissive glance from Kyle, my resolve hardened. Soon, very soon, they'd all see the truth. And this elaborate facade they had built would come crashing down, leaving nothing but the rubble of their pretenses and lies. Kyle cornered me in the hallway right after I finished tucking Evan in. I could see the frustration etched on his face. "Jenna, about this reunion, I expect you to handle everything. All the logistics, the finances, everything." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Of course, I already have a plan." "You better not screw this up," he added, leaning in close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. "I won't." I stepped back, creating some distance between us. "Anything else?" he smirked. "Just remember, all eyes will be on you. If you fail, it's on you." His threat hung in the air as he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a sense of impending doom. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Logan. "Need anything? Call me." I felt a surge of gratitude, but tonight wasn't the night to call. Kyle's words still echoed in my head, but there was something else I needed to focus on, figuring out how to turn his arrogance into an opportunity. The next day, I was back at Emily's office. She had files and folders spread out, charts showing everything from seating plans to catering options. "Emily, have you ever managed something this complicated before?" I asked, slightly overwhelmed. She laughed. "This is my forte, Jenna, but more importantly, how are you holding up?" "I'm ready to play my part," I replied. "Kyle wants me to handle everything, and I plan to do just that." A look of concern crossed her face. "We need to make sure you stay focused. Don't let him or Clara break your spirit." "Trust me, they won't get the better of me," I said with a determined smile. Together, we went through every detail. Emily had contacts in every industry you could imagine. We arranged for the best caterers, the most exquisite decorations, and a guest list that would make Clara proud on the surface. But underneath it all, there was a carefully laid trap. That evening, after making dinner for Evan and putting him to bed, I decided to confront Kyle about something that had been bothering me: the finances. I had stumbled across his credit card statements hidden in his office a few days ago. The balances were staggering, and it painted a different picture from the one he usually showed. "Kyle, we need to talk about something," I started as he watched TV. "What now?" he asked, not even bothering to look away from the screen. "Our finances. I found some statements, and it looks like we're in trouble." He muted the TV and stared at me. "You had no right to snoop around," he snapped. "What's going on, Kyle? Why are we in so much debt?" "All you need to know is that I have it under control. Stay out of it," he said, standing up and towering over me. "If you really had it under control, we wouldn't be in this mess," I shot back. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make a point. I said, "Stay out of it." I wrenched my arm free, my heart pounding. "You're playing a dangerous game, Kyle. One of these days it's all going to come crashing down." He laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "We'll see about that." I retreated to my room, my mind spinning with thoughts of what I'd uncovered. It was clear now, it wasn't just about holding my ground anymore. It was about survival and leveraging what I knew to protect myself and Evan. As I lay in bed, my phone buzzed again with a message from Logan. "Thinking of you. Be strong." I clutched the phone, feeling a surge of resolve. Tomorrow, I would make a call to my brother, and together, we'd start executing the plan. The clock was ticking, and every second brought me closer to the reunion, closer to exposing the truth. Because in the end, it wasn't just about getting revenge on Kyle and Clara. It was about winning back my freedom and showing them that their reign of terror was over. The following morning, I woke with a clear mission. Jenna 2.0 was ready to fight back. I called Logan, who picked up after the first ring. "Jenna, what's going on?" he asked, voice full of worry. "I need your help. It's about the reunion." I explained the situation and the financial trouble Kyle was hiding. Logan didn't hesitate. "I'm here for you. I'll do whatever it takes to get you out of there," he said. "I just need to gather more info, cover my bases," I replied. We agreed to meet later to go over the details of what I had found. But first, I needed to put on the show of a lifetime for Kyle and Clara. Emily and I continued with the planning, her keen eye and vast experience proving invaluable. We met with caterers and decorators, inspecting sample menus and color palettes. Every interaction was a chess move, positioning the pieces just right. As we finalized plans, a thought gnawed at me: Clara's real intentions. One evening, while Clara was busy criticizing my choice of napkin folds, I peeked into her study. There, among invoices and old letters, I found her bank statements. It was worse than Kyle's situation. Large sums of money shuffled between accounts, traces of expensive purchases. My eyes widened at the reality that Clara was bleeding funds to keep her control intact. "Mom, what are you doing?" Evan's voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, his wide eyes reflecting concern. "Just some boring adult stuff, sweetie. Why don't you go color?" I said, hoping he wouldn't catch on to the tension. "Okay," he said, his innocent face breaking into a small smile before he trotted off. I slipped the papers back and carefully exited the room. As Clara emerged from the kitchen, her eyes narrowed. "What were you doing in my study?" she demanded, suspicion lacing her tone. "Just looking for some old family photos," I lied easily, meeting her gaze without wavering. "Don't touch my things," Clara hissed, her nostrils flaring. Later, I met Logan at a small cafe away from prying eyes. I spread out what I had found on the table. Logan whistled low. "They're neck-deep in debt," he said, reviewing the information. "This is my leverage, Logan. This is how I turn the tables. You've got them by the throat, but be careful. They'll retaliate if they suspect anything." "I know," I nodded, swallowing my fear, "but I'm ready." We created a plan to unveil the financial downfall at the reunion. A slideshow, discreet murmurs among guests, subtle but effective. Our goal was to allow others to piece the puzzle together, sparking doubt. The week before the reunion, tensions were at an all-time high. Kyle was on edge, micromanaging every detail from afar while still trusting me to do the bulk of the work. Clara hovered, her eyes always watching. Emily and I added final touches meticulously, breaking for whispered strategy sessions. Everything needed to be perfect. Imperfection was our ally, hidden among gems. The day of the reunion finally arrived, and the house transformed. Fairy lights twinkled outside, tables laden with gourmet food adorned the living room. It was a vision, a serene facade over a simmering volcano. As Kyle hobnobbed with guests, his laughter loud and falsely jovial, Clara drifted from group to group, ensuring everyone knew she was the grand orchestrator. "They bought it," Emily whispered, standing beside me. "Good. Now, let's finish this," I replied, my pulse quickening. As the evening wore on, I noticed Kyle's brow furrow, a sheen of sweat visible under the party lights. Clara's smile tightened when guests started murmuring about rumors. "Jenna, a word," Kyle demanded, pulling me aside. His eyes searched mine, confusion and suspicion intermingled. "What's going on?" "I have no idea," I lied smoothly, raising a glass to take a sip. "It seems they're just talking." "You better not be behind this," he snarled, his grip on the glass tightening. "I'm just following your orders, Kyle. Enjoy the party," I said, walking away to mingle with guests, giving them knowing looks and selective bits of juicy information. As the night deepened, the whispered rumors turned into open conversations. The seeds of doubt were blossoming. Clara's mask of control cracked, and Kyle's facade began collapsing under the scrutiny. I watched from the corner, standing with Emily, strength pulsing through my veins. The time for everything to crumble was near. The empire of lies Kyle and Clara built would not survive this night, and come morning, freedom would finally be within my grasp. The main event of the evening approached, a speech from Clara. She had rehearsed it for weeks, littering it with references to her benevolence and family values. Standing in front of the guests, she cleared her throat, her voice ringing out. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here to celebrate my birthday and the unity of our family." Kyle stood by her side, nodding along. His eyes darted nervously through the crowd. I exchanged a glance with Emily, who gave me a reassuring nod. "We have so much to be grateful for, and I'd like to take this moment to express my sincere gratitude. It hasn't always been easy," Clara continued, her voice tinged with fake humility. In the back of the room, Logan began to quietly circulate, strategically striking up conversations about the whispers he heard regarding Kyle and Clara's financial situation. The rumors began to ripple through the crowd, each murmur louder than the last. I approached the stage with a tray of champagne, stepping up to Clara as she finished her speech. "A toast to your health and happiness, Clara," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Clara smiled thinly, accepting the glass. "To family," she echoed, lifting it high. As everyone clinked their glasses, I caught Kyle's eye and nodded toward the projector screen where the slideshow was about to start. He didn't know what was coming, but unease crept into his expression. The first few slides were innocent family photos, but as the montage progressed, images of extravagant purchases and high-life snapshots began to blend with spreadsheets showing massive debts. Gasps filled the room. Clara's smile faltered. "Wait, what's this?" she stammered, panic rising in her voice as the images began to tell a damning story. Kyle's face grew pale. He lurched forward, trying to stop the presentation, but Logan intercepted, making it look like an accident. "Sorry, didn't see you there, Kyle," Logan said, stepping aside with a grin. "What are you doing?" Kyle hissed at me, his voice low and venomous. "Just sharing a complete picture of family unity, like Clara said," I replied, my eyes cold. Murky secrets spilled out as the slides continued. Faces in the crowd turned from curiosity to shock, disgust tracing their features. Key family members, the ones who mattered most to Clara and Kyle, began whispering among themselves, their faith shaken. Clara's grip on her champagne flute tightened, and she turned to me, eyes blazing with fury. You did this." I stood my ground, meeting her gaze evenly. "Everyone deserves to know the truth." Kyle stormed toward the projector, yanking the plug out. "Enough!" he barked, but the damage was done. Silence hung heavy in the room. Clara tried to compose herself, a manic desperation in her eyes. "Please, everyone, this is a misunderstanding. It's not what it looks like." One of Kyle's uncles, an imposing figure named Robert, stepped forward. "A misunderstanding? How do you misunderstand years of debt and deceit?" Kyle stammered. "Uncle Robert, please, we can explain." "No need. I can't believe this is how you've been operating, Kyle," Robert said with a disappointed shake of his head. The atmosphere shifted irrevocably. Clara's regal demeanor crumbled, and she looked around helplessly. Kyle's attempts to salvage the night failed miserably. Guests began to leave, their polite goodbyes tinged with disdain. Emily leaned in, whispering, "You did it. They're done." As Clara staggered out of the room, she shot me a withering look. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Kyle followed her, dejected and defeated. I watched them go, feeling an overwhelming surge of relief and triumph. The clock ticked closer to midnight, and the house, once a battlefield, began to return to its usual silence. Logan and Emily stayed behind to help clean up, their presence a calming balm on a night filled with chaos. "Thank you," I said, hugging them tightly. "No thanks needed, sis. You were incredible," Logan said, pride in his eyes. Emily added, "This is just the beginning, Jenna. Now you can start truly living." And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. The house that had once felt like a prison was now just a building, stripped of its power over me. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I was ready to face it, stronger and freer than ever before. The morning after the disastrous reunion, I woke up feeling strangely light, but the sound of Clara's strident voice soon shattered the newfound peace. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" Clara screeched, barging into the kitchen where I was making Evan's breakfast. Before I could respond, Kyle stormed in after her, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think you're clever, don't you, Jenna? I'll make sure you regret this." I took a deep breath, standing my ground. The truth was bound to come out. You can't blame me for your lies. Clara lunged at me, but Kyle held her back. "You've turned this family against us," she spat, her eyes wild with rage. "You'll pay for this." You brought this on yourselves, I said calmly. Now, if you don't mind, I have a son to feed. Just then, Evan walked in, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Mom, what's going on? Nothing, sweetie, I said, smiling down at him. Just go get dressed for school, okay? Evan nodded and shuffled back to his room. His presence diffused some of the tension. Kyle leaned in close, his voice low. This isn't over, Jenna. You'll regret ever crossing me. I met his gaze, unflinching. Try me. With a final glare, Kyle turned and dragged Clara out of the kitchen. The tension was palpable, but I refused to let it break me. Not now, not ever. Once Evan was off to school, I called Logan and filled him in on the morning's confrontation. Jenna, you need to be careful. Kyle sounds unhinged, Logan warned. I know, but I'm not backing down, I replied. I need to do this, for me and Evan. We agreed to keep in close contact and ensure my safety. I spent the rest of the day working with Emily on potential job opportunities and figuring out my next steps. As the afternoon bled into evening, Kyle confronted me again. This time, he had a disheveled and weary Clara in tow. What now? I sighed, exhausted by their relentless anger. You need to fix this, Kyle demanded. Call the family. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Why would I do that? I asked, folding my arms across my chest. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you and Evan have nothing, he threatened, his face inches from mine. You forget, I said coldly, that I already have nothing, thanks to you. Clara, her face twisted with desperate anger, chimed in. You just wait, Jenna. You think you're smart, but we'll see how long you can last without us. I smirked, feeling a rare sense of power surge through me. Watch me. They stormed out, leaving me alone in the quiet house. I sat down, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. They were losing control, and they knew it. Later, as I tucked Evan into bed, he looked up at me with concern. Mom, are we going to be okay? I brushed the hair from his forehead and smiled. Yes, Evan, we're going to be just fine. The days following the reunion were a whirlwind of whispers, calls from concerned family members, and the slow unraveling of Kyle and Clara's control. The final blow came when Robert, Kyle's influential uncle, arrived unannounced. I need a word with you, Jenna, he said, his expression serious yet kind. Of course, I replied, leading him to the living room. I wanted to apologize for what you've been through, Robert started. It's clear now that Kyle and Clara have been living a lie. Thank you, I said, touched by his sincerity. And that's why I've decided to support you and Evan. Whatever you need, I'm here. Relief washed over me, and for the first time in a long while I felt a true sense of hope. Thank you, Robert. That means more than you know. With Robert's backing, the tide had truly turned. The fortress of lies Kyle and Clara had built was in ruins, leaving them exposed and isolated. That evening, as I stood on the porch watching the sunset, I knew the battle was far from over. But I had allies, strength, and most importantly, the determination to see it through. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, I let myself savor this small victory. Evan and I were on the path to freedom, and no one, not Kyle, not Clara, could stop us now. The fallout from the reunion continued to ripple through our lives. Clara's usual iron grip on the family began to weaken, her manipulations exposed to those who once revered her. She was dealing with the social ostracism that came with her unveiled deceit, while Kyle's temper spiraled out of control. One evening, Kyle confronted me, his anger a barely contained storm. You've ruined everything, Jenna, he shouted, his face flush with rage. I stood firm, keeping my voice steady. This was your doing, Kyle. You and Clara lied and deceived everyone. He took a menacing step toward me, but just then the phone rang. It was Emily. I answered, keeping my eyes locked on Kyle. Jenna, are you okay? Emily asked, her voice tight with concern. I'm fine, Emily, I replied, my tone deliberately calm. What's up? I've got a job opening at the planning business. I think you'd be a perfect fit. Can you come by tomorrow to discuss it? I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. I'll see you then. As I hung up, Kyle's snarl pulled me back. A job? Now you think you can just walk away? Yes, Kyle. That's exactly what I think, I replied, walking past him without fear. The next day, I met with Emily and signed on to help her with events. It was a small but empowering start, a step toward financial independence. Later that week, Clara's desperation reached new heights. At a family gathering, which she had not organized, a scene erupted. Clara stumbled to her feet, visibly intoxicated. You all believe Jenna's lies over your own blood, she shrieked, swaying slightly. I watched from the corner, seeing key family members cringe and move away. Robert stood up, his face displaying a mix of pity and disdain. Clara, sit down before you make a bigger fool of yourself, he commanded. Fool? You think I'm a fool? She laughed, a high-pitched, unsteady sound. You're the fools for turning against me. Kyle tried to pull her back, whispering urgently, Mom, stop this, you're embarrassing us. But Clara pushed him away, her expression wild. No, they need to hear this. Everything I did was for this family, for you, Kyle. Robert intervened, his voice sharp. Enough, Clara. We've had enough of your lies. Her face twisted with rage and hurt, and she began to cry, finally breaking down in front of everyone. Kyle looked around, his face red with shame and anger. Feeling the moment was right, I stepped forward. It's time to end this charade, Clara. The truth is out, and it's better for everyone if you just accept it. Clara's eyes locked onto mine, filled with pure venom. You think you're so righteous, Jenna, but you'll pay. Mark my words, you'll pay. With that, Clara stormed out, and Kyle followed her, his steps heavy with defeat. The room remained silent, filled with the weight of the evening's drama. I slowly released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Robert approached me. You handled yourself well, Jenna. Don't let them drag you down anymore. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate your support, I said, my voice a little shaky but firm. Returning home, I found Evan drawing pictures at the kitchen table. His innocent presence grounded me, reminding me of what this fight was truly about. Hey, buddy, what are you working on? I asked, ruffling his hair. A picture for you, Mom. See, it's us at the park. I looked at the drawing, my heart swelling with love and determination. It's beautiful, Evan, just like you. The days went by, and slowly the storms receded. Clara retreated from social circles. Her influence diminished. Kyle, faced with the full extent of his financial ruin, became a shadow of his former self. Meanwhile, my routine with Evan became a source of strength. Mornings full of breakfast laughter, evenings filled with bedtime stories. The toxicity that once dictated our lives was fading, replaced by peace. As I lay in bed one night, my phone buzzed with a message from Logan. Proud of you, sis. You did it. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. Yes, we did, I whispered to myself, knowing this victory wasn't mine alone. Evan's quiet breathing from his room was a reminder that our journey was far from over, but for the first time I felt we were truly free. And that was more than enough to face whatever came next. I moved in with Logan the next weekend, Evan trailing behind me with a backpack full of his favorite toys. Logan's place was smaller but cozy, filled with warmth and comfort, everything our old house lacked. Welcome, guys, Logan said, helping Evan with his stuff. Make yourselves at home. Thanks, Logan. For everything, I replied, giving him a tight hug. Evan explored his new room with excitement, and for once I saw a genuine smile on his face. It was a good sign, one that told me we were on the right path. The next few days were a whirlwind of settling in and adapting to our new environment. I started my new job with Emily, and she made sure I felt at ease. Here's your desk, Jenna. Everything you'll need is right here, she said, showing me the ropes. Thanks, Emily. I can't tell you how much this means to me, I replied, my gratitude genuine. I'm glad to have you on board. We're going to make an excellent team, she smiled, giving me a reassuring pat on the back. Back at Logan's, Clara and Kyle's undoing was becoming a topic of gossip in every corner of our world. Clara had withdrawn, her social circle crumbling. Kyle faced constant scrutiny and was visibly crumbling under the pressure. One evening, Clara showed up at Logan's house, uninvited and visibly rattled. Jenna, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't bother hiding my surprise. What are you doing here, Clara? I came to make amends, she said, her voice cracking. Please, I've lost everything. Logan stepped forward protectively. Maybe you should leave, Clara. No, let her speak, I interjected, wanting to hear her out. I was wrong, Jenna, about everything. I see that now, Clara pleaded, tears rolling down her cheeks. I can't undo the past, but I'm begging you for a chance to make it right. I looked at Logan, then back at Clara. Memories of her cruelty flashed through my mind, but so did the thought of a fresh start. Clara, I won't forget what you did to us, but for the sake of Evan, I'll think about it. Clara nodded, her face a mixture of relief and regret. Thank you, Jenna. That's all I ask. As she left, Logan looked at me, eyebrows raised. You sure about this? No, but everyone deserves a shot at redemption. Even Clara, I said quietly. The resolution was fragile, but it was a start. It gave me some closure. Months went by and our new life started to feel like normal. Evan was doing well in school, making friends, and enjoying his childhood, a childhood not overshadowed by anger and manipulation. One day, Emily approached me with a look of excitement. Jenna, there's an opportunity I want you to consider. A management position has opened up, and I think you'd be perfect for it. I blinked, taken aback. Emily, are you serious? Absolutely. You've proven yourself more than capable. Think about it. I will, I said, a smile creeping onto my face as I thought about how far I'd come. That evening, I shared the news with Logan. Emily wants me to take a management role. That's fantastic, Jenna. You deserve every bit of it, he said, genuinely happy for me. As I walked to Evan's room to share the good news, I found him drawing another picture. This one was of the three of us, Logan, Evan, and me, smiling in front of a house. Is that our new home? I asked, my heart swelling with pride. Yeah, Mom, it's us, happy together, he said with an innocent smile. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I hugged him tightly. You did a great job, Evan. It's perfect. Looking at the picture, I realized that revenge had transformed into a journey of growth. We had moved past the pain and found strength in each other. No longer bound by the toxic grasp of Kyle and Clara, we were free to rebuild our lives. As I tucked Evan into bed that night, I whispered, We're going to be just fine, Evan. Better than fine. We're going to be great. Our battle was over, and we had won more than just freedom. We'd gained a new beginning. This was our story now, rewritten in strength and love. And as I closed my eyes, I knew our future was as bright as the morning sun. Mason, my fiancée is pregnant, so let's make this quick. Pack your things and leave. I froze, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Mason stood there with a nervous woman holding her close. Her face was familiar, yet it took a moment for everything to click. Fiancée? Pregnant? Mason, what are you talking about? I asked, my voice shaking. He pulled her even closer, almost shielding her from my questions. Meet Lily, my soon-to-be wife. She deserves better than what you could ever give. Lily? My cousin Lily? The office intern I hired as a favor? The room spun, my vision blurring. Mason had always been distant lately, but I chalked it up to our struggles. Infertility had a way of tearing even the strongest couples apart, but this was beyond comprehension. I took a step back, bumping into the corner of the table. Lily, I whispered, not trusting my voice. You're with Mason? Lily's eyes darted around the room, refusing to meet mine. She looked more nervous than guilty. Mason, on the other hand, had a steely resolve, a determination I hadn't seen in a while. I know this is hard, he said, his tone softening ever so slightly. But Lily is pregnant. I need to be there for my child. Child? I scoffed, anger boiling up inside me. Mason, we've been trying for years, and now you just throw me aside for her. Lily spoke up then, her voice timid but firm. Darcy, I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for this to happen, I repeated, incredulous. You're my cousin, Lily. You work for me. How long has this been going on behind my back? Mason cut in. She's not to blame here. I fell in love with her. It just happened. The betrayal stung like a physical blow. And what about us, Mason? What about everything we went through together? The treatments, the doctors, the hopes every month that were dashed over and over? He didn't answer, just shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry, Darcy, but I have to do what's right for my child. The room felt small, stifling. I needed air. Without another word, I turned and left, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. My own husband, with my cousin no less. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and so utterly alone. The echoes of their betrayal followed me out the door, every step heavy and deliberate. I needed a plan, something to hold on to. Mason wasn't just taking another woman. He was taking my family, my dreams, my future. He was leaving me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I walked back to our bedroom and began to pack my things, each item another reminder of the life we had built together. Photographs, mementos of trips we had taken, even everyday items like a toothbrush or a pair of slippers, felt loaded with memories that were now tainted. My phone buzzed with a call from Edith, Lily's mother, and my aunt. Ignoring it, I focused on packing. There would be time to deal with family repercussions later. For now, I needed to get out of here, to find some semblance of control. As I zipped up the last suitcase, the gravity of it all hit me. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was leaving behind a dream, a marriage, a future that would never be. But one thing was clear, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something else, something stronger, and I would see it through, no matter what it took. Packing my things was a blur. I moved mechanically, stuffing clothes into bags, barely noticing what I was grabbing. I had to leave Mason and Lily far behind. This house, once filled with love and laughter, now felt like a prison of broken dreams. I stepped out, feeling the cool night air hit my face. My phone buzzed again. Aiden, my colleague from the firm. I needed to clear my head, so I walked aimlessly, letting the city lights guide me. The following morning, I found myself outside a small cafe. I stepped inside, ordering a strong coffee. As I sipped, memories of my achievements at the firm floated back. I was good at my job, damn good. I had built my reputation as a successful architect, one project at a time. Then there was Mason, always by my side, or so I had thought. I had secured prestigious contracts for the firm and earned respect from my peers. But with every professional high came the personal low of our infertility struggle. Every failed attempt at having a baby had driven a wedge between Mason and me. But I had always believed we would pull through. We met Lily at a family barbecue. She was fresh out of college, looking for a job. Out of pity, I offered her an internship at my firm. She seemed willing to work hard, at least in the beginning. As time passed, her cocky attitude surfaced. She was sloppy, often arriving late or skipping meetings altogether, leaving me to cover for her. But she was family, and I didn't want to create waves. My thoughts were interrupted by the cafe's doorbell. I looked up to see Claire, my best friend, walking through the door. She saw me and rushed over. "Darcy, I came as soon as I got your message. What happened?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I took a deep breath. "Mason, he's with Lily, my cousin. She's pregnant." Claire's eyes widened. "Are you serious, Lily? That little?" She took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, voice barely a whisper. I feel betrayed by both of them. "Darcy, you don't deserve this," Claire said, squeezing my hand. "You've been through so much." "I can't just let it go," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "They've taken everything from me. I need to find out more." Claire nodded, her expression serious. "I'll help you any way I can." Later that day, venturing to the firm felt strange. The familiar glass doors, the hum of busy work life, all seemed unchanged, yet my world had shifted. The office was buzzing as usual, but as I entered, everything paused for a moment. Whispers floated through the air. In my office, Lily was at her desk, pretending to be busy. I approached her. "We need to talk." She looked up, trying to appear nonchalant. "Is this about last night?" "Oh, you bet it is." I snapped. "How long has this been going on? You think you can just waltz in and destroy my life?" "Darcy, calm down," she said, looking around nervously. "It just happened. Mason loves me, and he's going to be a father." "Save it," I said, glaring at her. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." I walked away, feeling the eyes of curious colleagues on my back. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. If they thought they could ruin my life and get away with it, they were sorely mistaken. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to fight back, whatever it took. The next few days felt like navigating a minefield. I kept to myself at the office, focusing on work to keep the turmoil at bay. But it was impossible to ignore Lily's presence. Her attitude had shifted noticeably, cocky, almost smug. One rainy Tuesday, I entered the break room to find Lily gossiping with some colleagues. "Darcy is such a control freak. She's always making everything about her," Lily was saying. I felt a wave of anger. "Excuse me?" I demanded, stepping forward. Lily's eyes widened momentarily, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, Darcy, I was just saying how dedicated you are to your work." "Save it," I snapped. "Get back to work, all of you." As the small crowd dispersed, I cornered Lily. "I know what you're doing. You may have Mason fooled, but not me." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't control everything, Darcy. Sometimes things just happen." I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to scream. "You're playing with fire, Lily. Don't forget that." With that, I turned and left, my heart pounding. I needed to find a way to expose her. But how? Later that week, I started noticing the little things. Lily's work was sloppy, errors everywhere, deadlines missed. It seemed like everything was falling apart around her, except she didn't care. She seemed more interested in flaunting her newfound confidence and her supposed connection to Mason. I called a meeting with Aiden. He was my rock, my trusted colleague. We sat in my office, the door closed for privacy. I need your help, I said. Aiden looked worried. What's going on, Darcy? I need to find out everything about Lily. She's ruining everything I've worked for, and Mason, he's completely blind to it. He leaned forward, concerned. You think she's up to something more? I know she is, I said firmly. But I need proof. Aiden nodded. All right, I'll see what I can dig up. Feeling somewhat better, I focused on work, burying myself in blueprints and project deadlines. But Lily's presence was always there, a constant reminder of my ridicule and betrayal. During lunch one day, I overheard Lily talking loudly to some colleagues. Darcy's designs are so outdated. I don't know why she gets all the credit. I clenched my jaw and continued eating, focusing on every word, my anger intensifying with every snide comment. That evening, Aiden met me in the parking lot. I found something, he said, holding a file. What is it? I asked, eager. Her resume is padded. She lied about her qualifications. She didn't even graduate. I took the file, feeling a sense of relief mixed with anger. This is it. This is how we expose her. The next day, I called Lily into my office. She walked in, her confidence annoyingly high. Close the door, I said. She did, eyeing me warily. What's this about? I threw the file on the desk. Your lies, Lily. Your fake qualifications. You think you can come in here and tarnish everything? She glanced at the file, then back at me. And what are you going to do about it? This, I said, goes straight to HR. You're done here. Lily's face turned pale. You can't do that. Watch me, I said. You've played your games for long enough. You've played your games for long enough. As she stormed out, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't over yet, but it was a start, and I wasn't going to stop until I had my life back piece by piece. Lily had been removed from the office, but her presence still lingered like a bitter aftertaste. Mason's betrayal was a wound that wasn't healing, and I found myself constantly battling anger and sadness. But I had to push forward. There was more to uncover and a life to rebuild. One evening, I found myself in our now fractured home, staring at the empty spaces where Mason's belongings used to be. My phone buzzed. Claire. Darcy, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice full of concern. I sighed, trying to keep my head above water. Listen, I heard from Edith. She's shocked about what happened. She had no idea. Good, I said grimly. At least someone's on my side. Have you thought about what's next? Claire pressed. I have, I said, feeling a new determination. I need to figure out everything about Mason and Lily's relationship. There are too many questions. Claire paused, then asked, and after that? After that, I'll decide, I replied, my mind whirring with possibilities. At work, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew about Lily's abrupt departure, but no one dared to ask me directly. Instead, whispers and sideways glances filled the office. Despite the chaos, Aiden remained a rock. Darcy, how's everything? He asked, showing genuine concern. I'm coping, I said. I'll need your help again, Aiden. There's more to this story. I've got your back, he assured me. Days later, trouble brewed again. Mason showed up at the office unannounced. His presence sent immediate unease through me. Can we talk? He asked, his tone softer than I expected. I gestured for him to enter my office, closing the door behind us. What do you want? He hesitated, then said, Darcy, I didn't come here to fight. I want to explain. Explain? I scoffed, crossing my arms. Explain how you cheated on me with my cousin? Knocked her up and expected me to just pack up and leave? He winced. I know it looks bad. Looks bad? I interrupted, my voice rising. It is bad, Mason. He took a deep breath. It wasn't planned. It just happened. We didn't mean to hurt you. My eyes hardened. Oh, save it. None of that excuses what you did. Darcy, I miss you, he admitted, voice shaking. Miss me? I laughed bitterly. You're unbelievable. He reached out, but I stepped back. Darcy, please understand. I'm still here for you. I shook my head, feeling disgusted. You've ruined everything. There's no turning back now. Can we at least talk? He pleaded. One last chance? I stared at him, debating. Fine, we'll talk, but not now. I need time. Mason nodded, grateful. Thank you. As he left, I sank into my chair, trying to process the emotions swirling inside me. One thing was clear. I couldn't trust his words. Aiden knocked, entering the room. Everything okay? No, I admitted, feeling exhausted. But I'll manage. Stay strong, Darcy, he said. You've got people who care about you. Thanks, Aiden, I said, giving him a weak smile. I appreciate it. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to piece together the fragments of my life, slowly but surely. Mason's betrayal and Lily's deceit had rocked my world, but they wouldn't break me. This was just a temporary setback. I was stronger than that. I sat at my desk the next day, trying to focus on my designs, but Mason's unexpected visit haunted my thoughts. Suddenly, there was a light knock at the door. Aiden peeked in. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Yeah, come in," I replied, putting down my pencil. He closed the door behind him. I did a little more digging into Lily's past, found something interesting. "What is it?" I asked, intrigued. He handed me a folder. Her last 2 jobs didn't end well. Both places reported issues with her work ethic and integrity. "Not surprised," I muttered, flipping through the pages. "This just adds to the pile." Aiden leaned in. "What's your next move?" "I'm going to expose her for who she really is," I said firmly. "But I need to do it right." That evening, I was at home, pacing the living room, when I heard a knock. I opened the door to find Mason and Lily standing there. My stomach churned. "What do you want?" I demanded. "We need to talk," Mason said. "Fine. Make it quick," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "We're here to clear the air," Mason started, his tone unusually calm. "Clear the air?" I said, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" Lily spoke up then, her voice lacking any real sincerity. "Darcy, we didn't mean for things to get out of hand." I glared at her. "You think you can just waltz in here and make everything better with a few words?" Mason sighed. "We want to make amends." "Amends?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You've destroyed everything I cared about." Lily shifted uncomfortably. "Darcy, Save it, Lily," I interrupted. "I know about your past jobs, your lies. You're not fooling anyone here." Mason's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Ask her," I said, nodding towards Lily. "She's been lying through her teeth." Lily's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "Darcy, please. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, my voice ice cold. "You're a manipulator and a fraud." Mason turned to Lily, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Mason, Enough," I shouted, my emotions boiling over. "Get out of my house." Mason hesitated, then took Lily by the arm, leading her out. "We'll talk later," he muttered. As the door closed behind them, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't over, but it was a start. The next day at work, I called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room, the air thick with curiosity. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I have some important updates." I paused, letting the room settle. "It has come to my attention that certain individuals have been spreading false information and causing unrest in the office." There were murmurs of agreement and nods around the room. "As your leader, it is my responsibility to ensure a trustworthy and professional environment," I continued. "I want you all to know that we are taking steps to address this." Aiden, who was standing in the back, gave me a supportive nod. "We're in this together," his eyes seemed to say. As the meeting ended and people filed out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't going to let anyone ruin what I had built. Not Mason, not Lily. This was my life, my work, and I would protect it fiercely. Later that night, as I sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below, I felt a sense of resolve. The journey was far from over, but I was ready. This fight wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life and my future. And I was far from done. I woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to dig deeper into Lily's past. Aiden and I had only scratched the surface, and I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. I called Aiden to my office. "We need more on Lily. I have a feeling her deceit goes deeper than fake resumes." "Understood," he said. "I'll make it a priority." Feeling a bit lighter, I returned to my work. My designs were coming together nicely, and the distraction was welcome. A few days later, Aiden walked in with another folder. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing it over. Inside were documents outlining a string of manipulative relationships and deceitful behaviors, not just at work, but in her personal life too. It was a goldmine of dirt. "She's left a trail of destruction everywhere she's been," I muttered. "It gets worse," Aiden added. "She has a history of lying about pregnancies to keep men around." I felt a surge of anger and disgust. "This is perfect. We have to confront her." Aiden nodded, determination in his eyes. "Let's do it." We decided to confront Lily in the office. As we walked through the hallways, my heart pounded. This was it. In the break room, Lily was chatting with some colleagues, clearly enjoying herself. Aiden and I approached her. "Lily, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She glanced up, surprised. "Now?" "Yes," I snapped. "Now." We moved to a private corner, Aiden standing close behind me for support. I held up the folder. "You know what this is?" I asked, my tone icy. Lily's eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. "What are you talking about?" "Your history of lies and manipulation," I said, opening the folder. "Fake pregnancies, deceitful relationships, and the list goes on." Her face went pale, her facade crumbling. "Darcy, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You've been using people for your own gain, and it stops now." She looked at Aiden, pleading. "You can't believe this. It's not true." Aiden's expression was cold. "We've seen enough proof, Lily. You're finished." Her shoulders slumped, realizing she had no way out. "Please, Darcy, I'm begging you. Don't do this." "You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my life," I said, my voice firm. "Pack your things and leave." As Lily left the office, tears streaming down her face, I felt a sense of triumph. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Later that evening, I received a call from Mason. "Darcy, we need to talk. Lily is saying all sorts of things." "Meet me at the office," I replied. He arrived, looking troubled. I stepped out, holding the folder. "You need to see this." As he flipped through the documents, his face turned ashen. "I can't believe this," he whispered. "Believe it," I said coldly. "She's been lying to you from the start." "But the baby," he stammered. "Lies," I confirmed. "It's what she does." Mason looked broken. "Darcy, I'm so sorry." "It's too late for apologies," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choice." As he left, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. The truth was out, but the damage was done. Yet I realized this was a new beginning. The storm had passed, and I was ready to rebuild, and I had the strength to do it. Is it with or without Mason? The next few days passed in a haze. The revelation about Lily had caused ripples throughout our social and professional circles. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone knew about her deceitful ways. I received a call from Edith, Lily's mother, one afternoon. Her voice was trembling. "Darcy, what's happening? Lily's been saying terrible things." "She brought it on herself, Edith. She lied and manipulated everyone," I replied. "But she's my daughter," Edith said, her voice breaking. "I know this is hard, but she's been deceiving us all. You have to understand that," I said gently. There was silence, then a soft sob. "I trusted her. I trusted her with you." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as Edith cried softly. When she finally hung up, I felt a strange sense of empathy mixed with resolve. The truth was out, but the fallout was far from over. Mason was having his own share of problems. His colleagues at work had begun to distance themselves, and our mutual friends were hesitant to take a side. One evening, he showed up at the office, looking haggard. "Darcy, can we talk?" he asked, his voice rough. I looked at him, feeling a pang of sympathy. "All right." We sat in my office, the air thick with unspoken words. "I've lost everything," he said finally. "You brought this on yourself, Mason. You chose Lily, knowing what it would cost." He looked down, rubbing his temples. "I know, and I regret it every single day, but I didn't know she was lying about everything." "It's too late for regrets," I said firmly. "You have to face the consequences." We sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, Mason looked up. "Is there no way to make amends?" I shook my head. "You shattered any trust I had. This isn't something that can be fixed with words." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand." As Mason left, I felt a wave of exhaustion. It was like coming to the end of a long, grueling marathon. There were no winners here, only survivors. On the work front, my determination paid off. My projects were on track, and the team had rallied behind me. Claire was a constant source of support, and Aiden's steadfastness made every challenge seem manageable. One evening, we gathered at a small bar to unwind. Claire raised her glass. "To Darcy, for showing us what real strength looks like." Everyone cheered, and I felt a warmth spread through me. These were my people, my real family. As the night wore on, Aiden pulled me aside. "You did it, Darcy. You've come out stronger." "I had help," I replied, smiling at him. He looked at me, his gaze steady. "You're incredible. You know that? You deserve so much better." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. "Thank you, Aiden, for everything." Walking home that night, the city lights seemed brighter. I had faced betrayal, deceit, and heartbreak. But through it all, I had found my true strength. The next morning, I sat in my office, planning the next big project. There was a knock at the door, and Claire walked in with a huge grin. "You won't believe this. Lily's trying to salvage her reputation, but no one's buying it. She's getting ostracized everywhere." I looked at her, feeling a sense of justice. "Karma," Claire nodded. "Exactly. Karma." As I turned back to my work, I felt a deep sense of closure. Everything was falling into place, the pieces of my life rearranging themselves into something stronger, something new. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. Months had passed since the storm of betrayal and revelation. My life had slowly pieced itself back together, stronger and more resilient than ever. My career was flourishing. Heading several new architectural projects felt like a triumph, a testament to my determination and skill. One afternoon, while I was overseeing a site, my phone rang. It was Claire. "Darcy, you've got to see this," she said excitedly. "What's up?" I replied, trying to hear over the construction noise. "Check your email right now," she insisted. I found a quiet corner to look at my phone. In my inbox was a forwarded message outlining a prestigious architecture award nomination. "I don't believe it," I whispered, scrolling through the details. "Believe it, girl. You've earned this," Claire said with pride. I leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of the past year lift slightly. "Thank you, Claire, for always believing in me." In the following weeks, my workload grew, but so did the excitement. I threw myself into the projects, channeling every ounce of my energy and creativity. The team rallied around me, their support and enthusiasm a constant boost. One evening, as we wrapped up a meeting, Aiden approached me. "There's a gala for the award nominees next week. Are you going?" I wasn't sure, I admitted, but maybe I should. "You should definitely go," he encouraged. "And you won't be going alone. We're all going to be there, cheering you on." I smiled, feeling grateful. "Thanks, Aiden. That means a lot." The night of the gala arrived quickly. Dressed in an elegant black gown, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Claire and Aiden met me at the venue, both looking proud and supportive. As we entered the grand hall, I spotted familiar faces, colleagues, clients, industry leaders. It felt surreal to be among them as a nominee. The evening progressed with speeches and presentations. When my name was announced as the winner of the Rising Star Award, the room erupted in applause. I walked up to the stage, my heart pounding. "Congratulations, Darcy," the presenter said as he handed me the trophy. "Thank you," I managed, feeling a wave of emotion. "This means the world to me." As I stood there holding the award, I saw Mason at the back of the room. He looked different, humbled, almost defeated. After the ceremony, he approached me hesitantly. "Darcy, can we talk?" he asked, his voice filled with regret. I nodded, leading him to a quieter corner. "What is it, Mason?" "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I've realized how much I've lost," he said, his eyes earnest. I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. "Mason, I appreciate your apology, but it's too late. You broke something that can't be fixed." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. I just needed you to know." As he left, I felt a sense of closure. The past was behind me, and I was ready to move forward. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. The gala, the award, Mason's apology. It all felt like a final chapter closing. My future was bright, filled with new opportunities and possibilities. Returning to my office, I found a small bouquet on my desk with a note from Aiden. "To new beginnings." I smiled, feeling hopeful. Life had thrown its worst at me, but I had risen above it. I was ready for whatever came next, strong and unbreakable. As I sat at my desk planning the next big project, I knew one thing for sure. I had reclaimed my life, and I wasn't looking back. The journey had been painful, but it had also made me who I am, unstoppable. "I can't do this anymore, Liv. I want you out of my life," Blake said suddenly, his voice firm. I stared at him wide-eyed. "What the hell are you talking about?" He sighed, looking away. "We're done. I've got your stuff packed." It felt like a punch to the gut. This was the same man I had known for the last 6 years, and yet he seemed like a stranger. I paused, trying to process his words. "So what, Blake? 6 years of marriage just like that? You're gonna throw it all away?" He met my gaze, his eyes cold. "This isn't working, Olivia. I want you gone." Well, if he wanted a fight, I could give him one. But first, let me backtrack a bit. I'm Olivia, A 32-year-old freelance graphic designer, I would introduce myself. It wasn't always easy, but my hard work paid off, getting big clients and cushy gigs. Meanwhile, Blake was a mid-level manager at a tech company. We had our financial struggles at the start, but things leveled out thanks to my career. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought we were happy. Then Blake's parents, Harold and Martha, fell on hard times. Blake, ever the dutiful son, asked if they could move in with us. We were just making things work for ourselves. "Are you sure about this?" I asked him when he first brought it up. "Yes, Liv. They're my parents. They need us," he said, sounding so sure. I reluctantly agreed. Anything for him, or so I thought. The day they moved in, the air was thick with tension. Harold, 62, and Martha, 59, showed their gratitude at first. But gratitude is a fleeting thing. Soon, Harold's expressions of thanks were overshadowed by his demanding demeanor. Martha's critiques about everything became a daily affair. "Dinner is nice, but could we have expected a bit more seasoning?" Martha said with that ever-present, shaky smile. Blake started siding with them more and more. It didn't take long before he was spending most of his time glued to their sides, neglecting me. I focused on my work, trying to drown out the growing tensions at home. But the pressure from Blake kept mounting. He wanted more money, more support, more everything. "Can you pick up the tab for the electricity this month, and the water bill is due?" he'd say, almost as if it was a given. "Blake, I can't keep covering everything," I protested, but it was like talking to a wall. I felt like a stranger in my own house. The Blake I knew was slipping away, and a different person was taking his place. The tension clung to the air, thick and unyielding, suffocating any semblance of normalcy. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would have me fighting for my sanity and dignity. As I stood in our living room, Blake's cold words echoing in my head, I realized this was it. This was the moment everything started to unravel. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "If this is how you want it, Blake, then so be it." His eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly masked it. "Yeah, that's how I want it." With that, I turned on my heel, heading towards our bedroom to pack my things. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. This was just the beginning of a battle for my life, my freedom. A battle I was determined to win. When Blake's parents moved in, the change was immediate. The house felt tighter, the air tenser. Our first dinner together set the tone for what was to come. I had prepared a simple meal, but the quiet was deafening until Harold broke it. "This is it," Harold muttered under his breath, poking at his food with noticeable disdain. I forced a smile. "Is everything okay, Harold? Do you need anything else?" He barely looked up. "It's fine, Olivia. Just different from what we're used to." Blake, sitting next to his father, spoke up. "Liv's just trying to make everyone happy. Give her a break." Martha looked at Blake, her expression unreadable, and then turned to me. "Maybe next time you could let me help in the kitchen. I know how to make things a bit more flavorful." That was the beginning of it. The polite facade slipped quickly. Harold and Martha weren't just houseguests. They were critics, constantly finding fault in everything I did. Blake, who once had my back, stopped defending me as often. I found Blake in the living room one evening, talking to his mother. "She really needs to step up," Martha was saying. "This isn't just her house. It's everyone's now." Blake nodded, looking exhausted. "I'm trying, Mom. But you know Liv." Hearing this from the hallway, I clenched my fists. These subtle jabs felt like needles piercing my skin, constant and relentless. That night, as we lay in bed, I brought it up. "Blake, your parents are becoming a problem. This isn't what I signed up for." He sighed and turned over to face me. "They're just having a hard time, Liv. Cut them some slack. And can you help out more with the bills? We're all in this together." "Help out more?" I could barely keep the frustration from my voice. "I'm already covering more than half. How much more do you expect me to do?" I thought back to why I agreed to this in the first place. I loved Blake. I wanted to help his family, but it was becoming an unsustainable burden. Days turned into weeks. Harold and Martha weren't shy about being demanding. They didn't just criticize anymore. They expected complete servitude. "Olivia, can you take care of this? Olivia, can you do that?" Martha's requests were endless, and her criticisms were biting. One on particularly frustrating day, she asked, "What exactly is it that you do for work, dear? It seems like you're always on that computer, but is it really work?" I took a deep breath. Yes, Martha. Graphic design is my job. It pays the bills. Well, it's not real work, she said dismissively. Try managing a family, then you'll know what real work is. There was no winning with her. And Blake growing distant wasn't helping either. He came home later, avoided conversations, spent more time with his parents. One evening, I caught him glancing at his phone, the screen lighting up briefly. Who's that? I asked, trying to keep it casual. No one important, he replied, but his tone was off. It was becoming clear that something more was happening. In those moments, a fire started burning within me. I knew I couldn't keep this up. Something had to change, and if Blake wasn't going to step up for our marriage, I would have to take matters into my own hands. Dinner after dinner, day after day, their presence became more unbearable. My patience was thin. Every criticism, every demand was pushing me closer to the edge. If Blake and his parents thought they could walk all over me, they were in for a rude awakening. This was our home, but they had turned it into a battleground, and I was gearing up to fight back, one way or another. One evening, I overheard voices coming from the living room. I stopped in the hallway, straining to hear. Harold's voice was unmistakable. She's a gold mine, Blake. You should make sure we're all set for a while, Harold said, sounding smug. I know, Dad, Blake replied, his tone low. Good, just keep her earning. We'll be comfortable for years, Harold continued. I felt rage rising. They were talking about living off my hard work. I needed evidence, something concrete. I quietly pulled out my phone and recorded their conversation from the hallway, capturing their vile plans. The next morning, Martha found me working in the kitchen. Still on that computer, dear, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Yes, Martha. This is my job, I replied, trying to stay calm. She rolled her eyes. It's not real work. Try managing a household, then you'd understand what hard work really is. I wasn't going to let her get to me, not today. Well, someone's got to pay the bills around here, I said, adding a cutting edge to my voice. Blake's behavior was also getting strange. He wasn't just neglecting me, he was spending money lavishly, buying things we didn't need, new gadgets, expensive clothes, things that didn't add up given our financial situation. One night, I saw Blake getting ready to leave. Where are you going? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Just a work thing. Don't wait up, he said, avoiding my eyes. Work thing? I narrowed my eyes, but he brushed me off, already halfway out the door. Suspicion gnawed at me. I decided to follow him. Keeping a safe distance, I trailed his car down to a fancy restaurant. My heart dropped when I saw Blake stepping out, holding the hand of a much younger woman. I parked a bit away and watched, my stomach twisting as they walked inside and took a cozy, intimate booth. Pulling out my phone, I discreetly took photos, each flashless snapshot capturing a piece of my crumbling world. Later, they exited, and then it happened. He kissed her right there in the parking lot. I felt like screaming but held it in, capturing the damning evidence instead. It became crystal clear. Blake was cheating on me. I went home, replaying the day's events in my mind. Blake's family's leeching, Martha's incessant criticism, and now this, Blake's betrayal. I knew then that things had to change. I would not be their doormat anymore. The next morning, Martha started her usual tirade. Olivia, can you clean up the guest room today? No, Martha. I'm busy, I said bluntly, not looking up from my laptop. Well, excuse me, Mrs. Big Shot, too busy for household chores, she said, seething. I looked up, cool and composed. I'm running a business, Martha. Maybe if Blake contributed more, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Blake entered the room, sensing the tension. What's going on? Nothing, I said, packing my things for a work meeting. Just a reminder of who's actually keeping this house running. His eyes flickered with annoyance, but he said nothing. My resolve hardened. I would gather everything I needed and form a plan. Blake, Harold, Martha, they all underestimated me, but I wouldn't be underestimated for long. This was just the beginning, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow. I decided enough was enough. It was time to form an escape plan, and Blake would never see it coming. The first step was hiring a private investigator. I met with Mr. Davis, a seasoned investigator who had seen it all. Sitting across from him in his modest office, I laid out my situation. I need proof, Mr. Davis, proof of my husband's affair and anything else he might be hiding, I said, my voice firm. He nodded, jotting down notes. Leave it to me, We'll start digging. With the PI on the case, I began tightening the reins on my finances. I stopped contributing to the household bills, letting Blake feel the strain. He noticed quickly. What happened to all the money? Are you hiding it from us? He demanded one evening, his face twisted with frustration. I looked at him with a steely gaze. Maybe you should ask your girlfriend about financial transparency, I replied, my voice cold as ice. Blake's eyes widened, shock and fear flickering across his face. He tried to recover, but he knew I had caught him. What are you talking about? I've seen you, Blake. At the restaurant with her, I said, each word hitting him like a hammer. Don't pretend anymore. The color drained from his face. Liv, it's not what you think. Oh, it's exactly what I think, I said, my resolve hardening. From that moment, the atmosphere in the house became even more tense. Blake tried to downplay it, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, I focused on gathering my own evidence and taking back control of my life. A few days later, Mr. Davis contacted me with a file of findings. He had photos, phone records, everything I needed. I was ready to confront Blake and his family. One evening, as Blake and his parents sat in the living room, I walked in, holding the envelope of evidence. We need to talk, I announced. Harold glanced up, annoyed. What now, Olivia? Ignoring his tone, I focused on Blake. This ends now. I have proof of your affair and your parents' plan to live off my earnings. You've all been caught. Martha tried to interject. What nonsense are you talking about? I threw the envelope on the coffee table. The pictures and documents spilled out in front of them. See for yourselves, I said. Blake hesitated before picking up the photos. His face went pale as he looked through them. Harold and Martha leaned over, their expressions turning from curiosity to shock. This is ridiculous, stammered Harold, trying to regain control. You have no right. I have every right, I snapped. You've abused my trust, taken advantage of my hard work, and tried to deceive me. No more. Blake looked desperate. Liv, let's talk about this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, I said, turning away from him. I'm filing for separation. I'm done with all of you. Leaving them stunned and speechless, I went to pack my bags. The feeling of liberation was empowering as I packed up my essential belongings. Blake and his parents watched silently, the weight of their actions finally sinking in. As I walked out of the house, I felt a surge of relief. This was the beginning of my new life, a life where I would no longer be manipulated or betrayed. And no matter what came next, I was ready to face it on my own terms. Filing for separation was easier than expected. Blake didn't put up much of a fight. He knew the evidence I had against him was irrefutable. The papers were served, and I prepared to leave our shared home for good. On the day I planned to move out, I walked into a scene straight out of a bad drama. Blake, Harold, and Martha sat in the living room, their expressions dark and resolute. Blake stood up as soon as he saw me. Sit down, Olivia. We need to talk, he commanded, a hint of desperation in his voice. No, we don't, I replied, continuing to pack my things. Harold's voice boomed. Enough of this nonsense. You're going to sign this. He shoved a document in my face. I glanced at it. It was a legal form transferring all my earnings and assets to Blake. I looked at Harold incredulously. You've got to be kidding me. Sign it, Olivia, Martha chimed in. It's for the good of the family. Family? I shot back, fury rising. You mean the family that's been using me? The family that has lied and cheated and manipulated me? Blake looked at me, his facade crumbling. We're struggling, Liv. We need your help. I laughed bitterly. Your help? Help you and your parents continue to freeload off me while you carry on with your affair? Blake paled. That's over, Liv, I swear. Just sign the document and we can move forward. I glared at him, feeling the weight of every betrayal. Move forward? With you? No chance. With a shaking hand, I reached into my bag and pulled out the damning photos. I threw them across the table, watching as their faces twisted in anger and shock. What is this? Martha demanded, picking up a photo of Blake and his mistress. That, Martha, is evidence, I said coldly. Evidence that Blake has been lying to me, cheating on me, and now you want me to sign away everything I've worked for? Harold's face darkened. You ungrateful, I cut him off. Enough. I'm leaving, and I'm taking what's mine with me. As I turned to leave, Blake lunged for my arm. Wait, Liv. Please, let's talk about this. I yanked my arm free. There's nothing left to talk about. With my bags packed and dignity intact, I stepped out, leaving them behind. The sense of liberation was palpable. I drove to my new apartment, a small but modern place I had rented. It was starkly different from the house I shared with Blake, but it was mine, and that's all that mattered. A few days later, as I was settling in, Mr. Davis called me. "Olivia, there's something you need to hear." "What is it?" I asked, hoping it wasn't more bad news. "It's about Harold. I've dug up some information on his past financial dealings. It's bad, Olivia. Real bad." "Tell me everything," I said, bracing myself. As Mr. Davis outlined Harold's history of fraud and deception, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Blake and his parents had tried to ruin me, but now I had the upper hand. It was time to take things to the next level. Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And I was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. Moving into my new apartment was a breath of fresh air. Away from Blake and his toxic family, I finally felt like I could breathe. I poured myself into work, cutting off all financial ties with Blake. Without my support, it wasn't long before the pressure hit him and his parents hard. One morning, I received a frantic call from Blake. "Olivia, can we talk?" I laughed, the irony not lost on me. "What's there to talk about, Blake? We're done." "But the bills, the mortgage, we're drowning here." "Welcome to my world," I replied coldly before hanging up. That same afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Davis. "Olivia, I've found more on Harold. You might want to sit down for this." I leaned back, bracing myself. "Go ahead." Mr. Davis spoke calmly, but with a sense of urgency. "Harold has a history of defrauding others. I've compiled enough evidence that, if made public, could land him in serious trouble." A plan began forming in my mind. "Can you get me everything you have on him?" "Already on it," Mr. Davis assured. "You'll have it by tomorrow." The next day, a thick file arrived at my doorstep. Reading through it, I realized the gravity of Harold's actions. He wasn't just manipulative, he was a criminal. I knew what I had to do next. A week later, I made an anonymous call to a local journalist. "I have a tip on a significant financial crime," I started, my voice steady. "I have all the evidence you need." "What's the story?" the journalist asked, her interest piqued. "Harold Andrews, A History of Fraud. I'll send you the documents. You'll see for yourself." Within days, the news broke. Harold's past crimes were plastered all over local media. Blake's phone calls became more frequent, each one more desperate than the last. I ignored them all. Soon enough, I heard through a mutual friend that Blake was demoted at work due to the scandal. The glitzy facade of his life crumbled, leaving him exposed and humiliated. One evening, I received a call from Martha. Her voice was raw with anger and desperation. "How could you do this to us, Olivia?" "Do what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "You know damn well what," she screeched. "You've ruined us. Harold's reputation, Blake's job, everything." I savored the moment. "You ruined yourselves by underestimating me and taking advantage of me. This is on you." She hung up, but the victory felt hollow. Facing betrayal from the people you once called family leaves scars. Later that night, Blake showed up unannounced at my apartment. He looked defeated, tired shadows under his eyes. "Liv, please, I'm begging you. Can we just talk?" I let him in, but my guard was up. "What do you want, Blake?" He slumped on the couch, looking around my new place as if seeing the stark difference between this and our old house. "I messed up, Liv. I know that. But can we start over?" I shook my head, almost pitying him. "There's no starting over, Blake. You made your choices. Live with them." "But what about us?" he pleaded. I stood firm, crossing my arms. "There is no us. There never will be again. Goodbye, Blake." Seeing he was getting nowhere, Blake left, head hanging low. The door clicked shut behind him, and with it, I felt the final severance from my past life. The road ahead was mine alone to walk, and I intended to walk it with my head held high. The fallout from the scandal was swift and brutal. Harold's face was plastered across every news outlet, his history of fraud laid bare for everyone to see. Blake's demotion followed soon after. The tech company wanted nothing to do with scandal-tainted employees. The pressure cooker that was Blake's home life finally exploded. I heard through mutual friends that Harold and Martha were tearing into Blake like never before. Their golden son, who was supposed to save them, had instead plunged them into ruin. One day, Martha showed up at my door, her eyes blazing with fury. "Do you know what you've done?" she spat. I met her gaze, unflinching. "I did what I had to, Martha. You brought this on yourselves. How dare you?" she screamed, her voice shrill. "We trusted you, and you betrayed us." "Trusted me?" I shot back, incredulous. "You mean used me? Blake's affair, your freeloading, Harold's crimes, trust had nothing to do with it." She took a step closer, her jaw set in anger. "You can't win, Olivia. We'll bounce back. You don't get it, do you?" I said, shaking my head. "This isn't about winning. This is about getting free of your toxic grip. Go home, Martha. Face the consequences of your actions." She stormed off, but I knew this wasn't the end. Blake tried to win back my sympathy next, showing up at my apartment days later, looking more pathetic than ever. "Olivia, please. I need your help," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why should I help you, Blake?" I asked, genuinely curious. "We're losing everything. The house, the savings. I don't know what to do," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. I leaned back, arms crossed. "What happened to all those high-paying tech jobs, Blake? Where's your girlfriend in all this?" "She left," he confessed, eyes downcast. "Not surprising," I said with a faint smirk. "But that's not my problem anymore. You made your bed, Blake." His face twisted in pain. "How can you be so cold, Liv? We were a family once." "No, Blake, we weren't a family. Families don't lie and cheat and use each other. Now get out. I'm done." He left, shoulders slumped in defeat. The realization that he'd lost everything finally sinking in. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. Work was flourishing. Clients appreciated my dedication and creativity. I reinvested my earnings wisely, buying a cozy lakeside house. It was a fresh start, a beautiful escape from my turbulent past. A few weeks later, I received an email from an old friend who'd seen the news. "Heard about what you did. Let's catch up soon," it read. It felt good, reconnecting with people who hadn't been part of the toxic mess my life had become. One day, at a coffee shop where I often went to clear my head, a young woman approached me. "Excuse me, are you Olivia?" she asked nervously. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "I'm a graphic design student," she explained, her voice trembling. "I've been following your work. It's really inspiring." "Thank you," I said, smiling warmly. "What's your name?" "Emily," she replied. We chatted for a while, and I could see a spark in her eyes, a passion for design that reminded me of myself years ago. Before she left, I gave her my business card. "Stay in touch, Emily. I'd love to help you find your way in the industry." As I watched her leave, I felt a sense of fulfillment. I had managed to break free from my past and was now in a position to guide others. The journey had been painful, but it led me to a place of strength and clarity. No longer shackled by betrayal, I was free to chart my own course, confident in my self-worth and the lessons learned. Life by the lakeside was peaceful. Every morning I would sit on the porch with my coffee, the serene water reflecting the calm I now felt within. My graphic design business was thriving, and I reinvested my earnings wisely. It was empowering to be financially free and stable. One evening, as I was winding down, my phone rang. It was Emily, the young graphic designer I had met weeks earlier. "Olivia, do you have a moment?" she asked nervously. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" "I got an offer to work with a major design firm, but I'm not sure if I should take it. What if they want to take advantage of me, like your story?" Her concern was genuine, and I understood her fear. "Emily, listen to me. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. But also remember, not everyone is out to get you. Keep your eyes open and stay true to your values." "Thanks, Olivia. I just needed to hear that from someone who's been through it." "You've got this, Emily. Keep me posted, okay?" Hanging up, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Helping Emily reminded me of how far I'd come. I had turned my pain into a tool for supporting others. A few days later, while grocery shopping, I ran into an old acquaintance who had known both Blake and me. Sarah looked surprised to see me. "Olivia, I heard about everything. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing well, Sarah. Better than ever, actually. Blake and his parents are in shambles. Their house is being repossessed, and they're facing legal troubles because of Harold." "I heard," I said calmly. "Poetic justice, I suppose." "Poetic indeed," she agreed, giving me a knowing smile. "Well, it's good to see you thriving. Olivia, you deserve it." As I left the store, I reflected on Sarah's words. Thriving was exactly what I was doing. Every step away from Blake was a step toward reclaiming my life. One evening, while I was enjoying the sunset by the lake, I received a call from my lawyer. "Olivia, everything is finalized. You've successfully severed all financial and legal ties with Blake." Thank you, Linda. That's a huge relief. You're officially free, Olivia. Enjoy it. I intend to, I replied, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. With that chapter officially closed, I threw myself into my work and hobbies. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years, finding solace in the colors and brushstrokes. One weekend, a few old friends came over for a small get-together. As we laughed and reminisced, I felt a strong sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. By the end of the night, my closest friend, Jessica, pulled me aside. Olivia, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far. Thanks, Jess. It wasn't easy, but I had to do it for my sanity. You did, and look at you now. You're glowing. Her words meant everything. They validated my journey towards self-worth and healing. As the weeks passed, I continued mentoring Emily, helping her navigate the tricky world of freelance design. Each time we spoke, I saw a more confident, empowered version of her emerge. It was rewarding, knowing I was making a difference. One day, as I sat by the lake, watching the ripples dance across the water, I realized something profound. I had no regrets. Every painful step had led me to this place of peace and purpose. I picked up my sketchbook and began to draw, capturing the beauty of the moment, content with the knowledge that I had built a life worth living. Free from the chains of betrayal and manipulation, I had found my true self, and that was the greatest victory of all. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding as Dad's words echoed through the living room. Rachel, in this world, a woman's power is in her silence. Grandma Edith shot him a furious glare. Silence is not power, it's submission. You're suffocating her spirit. Dad's face reddened, and he turned his wrath on me. Go to your room, we'll discuss your disrespect later. I hurried out, tears stinging my eyes. Another misstep, another punishment looming. Grandma was right, my life felt like a prison, my voice constantly muzzled. Later that night, I heard shouting from downstairs. Grandma's voice rose defiantly above Dad's angry bellows. You can't keep treating her like this. She's not a possession to control. There was a loud crash, and my blood froze. I crept down the stairs to find Grandma clutching her cheek, a shattered vase at her feet. Get out, Dad snarled. You're a bad influence. Grandma looked at me, her eyes pleading. Come with me, Rachel, please. I didn't hesitate. Grabbing her hand, we fled into the night. Grandma's little house was cluttered but cozy, filled with life and laughter. She encouraged my love for art, something Dad had forbidden as frivolous. With her, I could breathe freely. A few years later at a local art fair, I met Marcus. Charming and supportive, he seemed like the perfect antidote to my oppressive past. Your work is incredible, he said, admiring my vibrant paintings. You have such talent. I blushed, captivated by his warm smile and genuine interest. Grandma approved, thrilled to see me happy. We married quickly, and at first everything was blissful. But gradually, Marcus's subtle criticisms began. Don't you think you're spending too much time on your art? He'd ask, frowning at my paint-stained hands. The house needs more attention. I brushed it off, not wanting to see the warning signs. Grandma's concerns, however, grew harder to ignore. Be careful, Rachel, she cautioned. His words may seem harmless, but they're trying to control you. I assured her it was fine, that Marcus simply wanted what was best for our future. But deep down, unease stirred, a sense that the silence I'd fought so hard to escape was closing in once more. The morning after our frantic escape, Grandma looked at me with sad eyes. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I should have gotten you out of there sooner. I squeezed her hand. You saved me. That's what matters, she smiled wanly. Your father, I always hoped he'd change, but some people are too set in their ways. An uncomfortable silence fell until she brightened. But now you're free. Free to live, to create, to become who you were truly meant to be. Under Grandma's guidance, I blossomed. Her chaotic little house became my sanctuary, a world away from Dad's harsh rules. I spent hours painting, pouring my pent-up emotions onto the canvas. At 18, I entered my first art show selling 3 pieces. The thrill of that accomplishment, the joy of strangers connecting with my work, nothing compared. Grandma beamed with pride. A few years later, at another local fair, a deep voice startled me. Excuse me, miss? Your paintings? They're breathtaking. I turned to see a tall, well-dressed man smiling warmly. Something about his gaze made me feel truly seen. I'm Marcus, he said, offering his hand. And you are? Rachel? I couldn't help but blush at his intense focus. Over the next few months, Marcus became a constant presence, always supportive, always in awe of my talents. With Grandma's blessing, we began dating, and I found myself falling for this caring, enlightened man. We married quickly, caught up in a whirlwind of romance. Marcus embraced my art, encouraging me to turn our small apartment into a studio. Your creativity deserves to be nurtured, he'd insist. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his tune began to shift. Don't you think you're spending too much time cooped up in here? He'd remark, eyeing my paint-splattered clothes with distaste. The apartment's a mess. I tried not to read into it, chalking it up to his desire for order. But the comments grew more pointed. We can't live like starving artists forever, he chided one evening, flicking at a stray brushstroke on the wall. Your hobby is distracting you from more important things. My chest tightened, Gran's warnings echoing in my mind, but I pushed them aside, clinging to the belief that Marcus only wanted the best for us. Then, like a dark cloud blocking the sun, Cheryl arrived. Marcus's mother swept in without warning, her cold eyes immediately finding fault as she surveyed our living space. Really, Rachel, she clucked, lip curling at my latest abstract piece. You've let things get quite out of hand here. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Mother's just trying to help, dear. We could use a woman's touch around here. And just like that, the walls began closing in once more. With Cheryl's arrival, a palpable shift occurred in our home. Her critical gaze seemed to find fault with everything I did. Honestly, Rachel, how can you let the dishes pile up like that? She tsk, already rolling up her sleeves to take over. No wonder Marcus is dissatisfied. Marcus would shrug apologetically. She's just trying to help, dear. Let her. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that mothers-in-law could be difficult, but Cheryl's help quickly became a stranglehold. New stringent rules governed the household. My art supplies were relegated to a tiny alcove, paints and brushes scrutinized as unseemly clutter. Cheryl made no secret of her disdain for my hobbies. A woman's purpose is maintaining her home, she declared one evening over a dinner I'd burned while distracted painting. All this. She waved a hand at my rejected canvases. It's just selfish indulgence. Marcus stayed silent, avoiding my hurt gaze. I wanted to protest, to remind him how he'd once delighted in my passion. But the words withered in my throat. Cheryl's control seeped into every aspect of our lives. She criticized my makeup, my clothes, the way I swept the floors. Nothing was ever good enough. You're too soft on her, I overheard her berate Marcus one night. You need to take the reins, son. The next morning, Marcus's eyes were cold as he handed me a list of chores and budget mandates. We're going to start doing things properly from now on, he stated flatly. My mother knows best. I stared at the draconian edicts, a knot forming in my throat. This was exactly the kind of oppression I'd fled from my parents' home. But I was a wife now. Wives obeyed their husbands, kept their households in order. That's what Cheryl and society demanded. So I fell silent and nodded. In the coming weeks, my life contracted around me. Art supplies were banned, deemed wasteful. Cheryl monitored our finances with an iron fist, doling out a paltry allowance for necessities. We can't have you frivolously spending on those silly painter's materials, she sniffed. I mourned my creations, my vibrant colors slowly graying like my mood. Surreptitiously, I began sketching in hidden corners, hoarding pilfered pencil stubs and charcoal like treasured gems. It wasn't much, but it kept me sane amid the increasingly oppressive household rules. Make the beds precisely at 6 a.m., dust on Mondays and Thursdays only, dinner on the table promptly at 6:30 p.m. Failure to comply brought Cheryl's withering scorn and Marcus's cold disappointment. I walked on eggshells, each day a battle to hold my tongue against their constant belittling. You're fortunate we put up with your nonsense, Cheryl snapped after I missed a spot whilst cleaning. I clenched my fists, desperately biting back the litany of retorts I longed to hurl, but one cutting remark slipped through. Yes, I'm so lucky to have such control over my life. The slap cracked like a gunshot. I reeled, tasting blood as Cheryl's ring split my lip. Marcus watched impassively as she grabbed my hair, yanking me close. Don't ever forget your place again, she hissed, eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. You'll do as you're told, or I'll make your life a living hell. I shrank back, cradling my stinging face as she stormed off. Marcus simply turned and followed, leaving me alone to lick my wounds. Curling on the bed that night, I traced the throbbing cut on my lip and finally let the tears flow. How could I have been so blind, so naive as to think I'd found an ally in Marcus? He was just another link in the chain, another cruel jailer suffocating my spirit. But a spark within me refused to be extinguished. I was stronger than their harsh words, stronger than their rules. I would find a way to breathe freely again. Grandma's voice echoed in my mind. Never forget who you are, Rachel. Your fire cannot be snuffed out so easily. And with that defiant flicker burning bright, I began plotting my escape. With my escape plans simmering, I attempted to keep a low profile around Cheryl and Marcus, but their disdainful glares made that impossible. "What's this?" Cheryl sneered one morning, holding up a pencil sketch I'd carelessly left out. She crushed it in her fist. "Haven't you learned your lesson about these childish pastimes?" I stared at the crumpled paper, something inside me cracking. Before I could stop myself, the words burst out. "It's not a pastime. It's my passion." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Your passion?" She barked a laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. A woman's passion is her family, or haven't I made that clear?" Seething, I opened my mouth, but Marcus cut me off. "That's enough, Rachel. Don't disrespect my mother." I gaped at him, stunned by his callous disregard for my feelings. The man I'd married, the one who once kindled my creative flame, was gone. This Marcus was cold, indifferent, a pale echo of his former self. Cheryl smirked victoriously. "From now on, I'll be handling all finances. Can't have you wasting money on silly hobbies." She plucked my debit card off the counter. "This is for your own good, dear." Impotent rage coursed through me, but I bit back my protests. Confrontation was useless against their united front. Over the following weeks, Cheryl's iron grip tightened until I felt smothered. She monitored every penny, allowing only meager funds for basic necessities. My art supplies, what little remained, were disposed of as wasteful clutter. "A wife's role is maintaining her household," she proclaimed loftily, "not indulging in silly distractions." I wanted to scream, to rage against her antiquated, oppressive beliefs, but one look from Marcus's disapproving eyes and the fire in my chest sputtered out. I was trapped, a bird in a gilded cage. My only solace came from secret messages with Lisa, my childhood friend. Late at night, I'd risk texting her about my suffocating home life, finding comfort in her outraged support. "You have to get out of there," she wrote one evening. "This is textbook abuse, Rachel." I traced the words, feeling both validated and afraid. Could she be right? Was this really abuse? The thought made my head spin. Marcus and Cheryl were difficult, controlling even, but abusive? Surely not. I was overreacting. Pushing aside my doubts, I kept venting to Lisa, finding strength in her empathy and care. Until one fateful night shattered that lifeline. "Who are you messaging?" Cheryl's voice sliced through the darkness like a whip. I startled, nearly dropping my phone as she loomed over me, eyes glinting with suspicion. "No one," I stammered. "Just an old friend." She snatched the device from my hands. "You know the rules about frivolous distractions. No exceptions." "Please, it's just... Did you hear me?" She raised her voice, cheeks mottling. "I said no exceptions." Marcus appeared in the doorway, frowning. "What's going on? Your wife was disobeying me. Again." Cheryl's tone dripped with disdain. "Wasting time texting friends instead of focusing on her duties." He crossed his arms, fixing me with that disapproving glower that made me shrink inside. "We've talked about this, Rachel. My mother's rules are for our own good." I opened my mouth, desperate to explain, to defend myself. But Cheryl silenced me with a contemptuous look. "Clearly you can't be trusted to follow simple instructions." She pried open a drawer and dropped my phone inside, along with my laptop. "No more distractions until you've learned your place." The finality of the slam made me flinch. Just like that, my last link to the outside world severed. I was alone, truly utterly alone with my tormentors. Without my phone and laptop, the walls closed in tighter than ever. My only connection to the outside world had been Lisa's understanding texts. Now, even that lifeline was severed. Cheryl's iron fist ruled every aspect of our lives. Schedules, chores, budgets, all dictated her draconian policies. One errant step, one perceived infraction, brought her wrath crashing down. "You missed a spot," she'd hiss after inspecting my cleaning. Again, "Are you intentionally trying to disrespect me?" I'd shake my head mutely, swallowing my protests as she berated me like a child. Marcus stood stone-faced during these tantrums, neither defending nor condemning me, just cold, silent indifference. Occasionally I caught him staring at me with an unreadable expression. A glimmer of the man I'd married flickered in his eyes as if struggling to surface, but it never did. One cowed look from Cheryl and that spark instantly extinguished. "Why are you looking at her like that?" she'd demand, voice dripping venom. The girl needs discipline, not pity. I wanted to grab him, shake him out of this toxic haze clouding his mind. Didn't he see how she controlled him too? But I knew speaking out would only provoke Cheryl's fury. So I remained silent and compliant, hoping to eventually wear her down. That strategy proved futile one evening after she caught me staring wistfully at an old canvas, reminiscing over the vibrant life I'd breathed into it. "Still pining over that silly hobby?" she sneered, plucking the artwork off its easel. "You need to let this go, Rachel. It's unhealthy." "Please." I reached for it, desperately. "That means everything to me." She clutched it against her chest, lips twisting into a cruel smile. "Oh, I know, which is why I'm doing you a favor." With a savage wrench, she tore the canvas from its frame, ripping it to shreds before my horrified eyes. I could only watch, paralyzed, as she methodically shredded the colors, the life, the peace I'd found in creating. When the last scrap fluttered to the floor, she tossed the mangled frame at my feet. "There. Your meaningless distraction is gone for good." Something inside me finally snapped. I rounded on Marcus, who had entered during Cheryl's fit of destruction. "Are you really going to let her do this?" I cried, anguished tears burning my eyes. "She's destroying me piece by piece. When will it be enough?" He blinked, seemingly jolted by my rare outburst. For a fleeting moment, remorse flickered across his features. But Cheryl was quicker. "Don't be fooled by her hysterics," she snarled, grabbing his arm in a vice grip. "She's manipulating you, turning you against your own family." Marcus's face hardened, the shutters slamming down once more. "Don't raise your voice at my mother," he said, each word like a slap. "She knows what's best." I recoiled, feeling the weight of his callous dismissal like a physical blow. This man, this cold, subjugated stranger, he wasn't the person I fell for. Cheryl smirked in triumph. "Now get this mess cleaned up," she ordered, "and no more of your self-indulgent moping, understood?" Throat-burning, I could only nod. I gathered the tattered canvas remnants, cradling the ruined pieces to my aching chest. Once they'd been my salvation, a window into an inner world Cheryl couldn't touch. But now, like everything else, it lay in shreds at her feet, just another causality in her war against my spirit. Each day I could feel myself withering, smothered beneath the weight of her rules, her scorn, her absolute control. That night, I cried myself into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of Grandma's warm embrace, her fierce insistence that my voice mattered. "You have more strength than you know," she always vowed. "Never let them silence you, Rachel." But it was hard to believe that now. I felt so powerless, so hopelessly trapped in this waking nightmare. Except, in the darkest hours before dawn, I was struck by a reckless thought, a tiny spark of defiance that would not be extinguished. Slowly, ever so slowly, I began plotting a way to reach out to Lisa again. One tiny act of disobedience that could reopen the line to the outside world. It was dangerous, risking Cheryl's wrath. But I had to try, had to find a way to fan that spark into a flame that could guide me out of this darkness. I would not be silenced forever. Somehow, someway, I would find my voice again. My secret act of defiance began innocently enough, stashing pencil stubs and charcoal nubs I found around the house. Cheryl would never have allowed me art supplies, but she couldn't deny me every writing utensil. In the dead of night, I'd steal away to a neglected corner of the basement and scratch out tiny sketches on scraps of paper. Rudimentary still lifes, faces, anything to momentarily free my mind from its cage. It was risky. If Cheryl caught me, there'd be hell to pay. But I craved that fleeting escape into my own little world, the one place she couldn't control. Then one night, as I was carefully stowing my meager supplies, a tattered envelope caught my eye. It was tucked behind an old furnace grate, slightly singed but intact. My heart stuttered when I recognized Grandma's looping handwriting. With shaking hands, I tore it open and began reading, hungrily devouring every line of her reassuring prose. "My dearest Rachel," she wrote, "each day I think of you and pray you found even an ounce of the freedom and happiness you deserve." Tears stung my eyes as I consumed her empowering words, the ones I so desperately needed to hear. Grandma had always been my rock, my safe harbor against the storms of life. Reading her letters made me feel cradled in her embrace once more. I quickly found the rest of them, a small cache Cheryl must have confiscated and then forgotten in her zealousness to cut me off from any outside influence. Each envelope was like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had an ally in my corner. "You are stronger than you know," Grandma's looping script insisted. "Never let that bitter shrew make you forget your fire." The letters reawakened a defiant spark I'd thought long extinguished under Cheryl's oppressive boot. My art, my voice, my very identity, she couldn't erase them, couldn't grind me down no matter how hard she tried. I began devouring the letters hungrily, daring to let myself dream of an escape, a future where I could breathe freely again. The sketches grew more elaborate, infused with newfound determination. But in my haste to savor Grandma's advice, I got careless. One night, as I was returning the letters to their hiding spot, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, dread churning my gut as a familiar sneer cut through the darkness. Well, isn't this just precious?" Cheryl's bony hand snatched the letters from my grasp, lips curling in distaste as she rifled through them. "So that's been your little secret." She fixed me with a glower that made my skin crawl. "Reading this treacherous bile behind our backs." "They're just letters," I whispered, anxiety clawing up my throat. "From my grandma. They're all I have left of her." "Exactly." Cheryl ripped them in half, letting the shredded pages flutter to the ground. "And she's clearly been a negative influence, filling your head with delusions of defiance." She grabbed my sketch pad, methodically tearing out pages and shredding them one by one. "Please," I heard the tremor in my own voice, hated how pathetic I sounded. "Those mean everything to me." "No." She punctuated each word by ripping another sketch asunder. "They're a distraction, a crutch keeping you from embracing your proper role." I could only watch, numb with horror, as she demolished the last fragments of my identity, of everything that made me feel whole. When the final scraps drifted to the floor, she grabbed my chin with cruel fingers, forcing me to meet her cold stare. "This defiance ends now," she hissed. "No more letters, no more scribbling, no more of this pathetic crying. You will obey, or I'll make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand?" I tried to pull away, but her nails dug into my skin like talons. "Do you understand?" she repeated, shoving her face towards mine. Flecks of spit struck my cheek as I shrank back, petrified. I could only manage a tiny nod. Cheryl released me with a contemptuous sneer. "Good. See that you remember it." She stormed off, leaving me huddled amid the tattered remnants of my spirit. I gathered the shredded sketches, the torn letters, and cradled them against my heaving chest. Grandma's parting words, now slashed to ribbons, drifted through my mind. "Never let them break you, Rachel. Never stop fighting." But as I wept over the ashes of my defiance, it was hard to see how I could ever keep that promise. After Cheryl's chilling outburst in the basement, an eerie calm descended over the house. She watched me like a hawk, looking for any hint of defiance to snuff out. I walked on eggshells, jumping at every creak, flinching from her piercing glares. Marcus, as usual, stayed silent and aloof. Whether he agreed with her tactics or simply lacked a spine, I couldn't tell. He just passively observed the slow erosion of my spirit. I knew placating Cheryl was useless in the long run. Her cruelty ran too deep, her need for domination too insatiable, but open rebellion would only provoke her wrath. So I bided my time, bottling my anger, my anguish, focusing it into a simmering determination. I would find a way to escape this nightmare. Somehow, some way, I'd break free. The opportunity came one night at dinner. Cheryl had been needling me all evening with snide remarks about my cooking, my cleaning, my inadequate performance as a housewife. "Honestly, Rachel," she clucked, grimacing at the lumpy mashed potatoes I'd made. "Is it too much to expect an edible meal?" I grated my teeth, sorely tempted to dump the whole bowl over her head. But I remained stone-faced, silently fuming as she continued her blistering critique. "No wonder Marcus is constantly disappointed. You're hopelessly incompetent." That barb struck a nerve. I opened my mouth, finally ready to unleash the torrent of anger I'd been holding back. But Marcus beat me to it. "That's enough," he said, voice low but firm. "There's no need to talk to her like that." We both froze, gaping at him in shock. Marcus had never once challenged his mother before, at least not in my presence. Cheryl recovered first, rearing back with an ugly scowl. "Excuse me, are you actually defending this useless girl?" "I'm just saying there are ways to give constructive criticism without being cruel." He set his fork down, meeting her seething glare steadily. The constant belittling helps no one. An ugly silence stretched between them. I shrank in my chair, heartbeat thundering in my ears as Cheryl's complexion modeled. "How dare you?" She rose from the table, hands trembling with outrage. "After everything I've sacrificed, you'd take her side against your own mother." Marcus faltered, shooting me an uncertain look, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, and he lifted his chin in defiance. Maybe it's time we had a serious discussion about boundaries. The resounding slap made me flinch. Cheryl's hand seemed to blur as it struck Marcus squarely across the face. "You ungrateful, spineless worm!" She loomed over him, eyes bulging with fury. "I gave up everything to raise you, and this is how you repay me?" Marcus cradled his reddening cheek, stunned into silence. An ugly chuckle ripped from Cheryl's throat. I knew letting that girl into our lives was a mistake. Her glare bored into me like a laser. "She's poisoned your mind, turned you against your own flesh and blood." I opened my mouth, desperate to defend myself. But the look on Marcus's face stopped me cold, a strange mixture of fear, resignation, and bitter acceptance. "You're right, Mother," he mumbled, not meeting my stricken gaze. "I was out of line. It won't happen again." Just like that, the fight drained out of him. My heart plummeted, realizing this intermittent backbone had been an aberration, nothing more. Cheryl sneered in triumph. "See that it doesn't." She rounded on me with undisguised loathing. "As for you, you'd better start showing more respect around here. The only reason I tolerate your presence is out of love for my son." Her lip curled. "Though God knows what he sees in a sniveling, ungrateful wretch like you." The words lashed me like a whip. I flinched, blinking back shameful tears as she swept from the room, her scornful cackle echoing like mocking laughter. Marcus stared at his plate, shoulders slumped in defeat. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he grow a spine and stand up for me, for us. But his haunted expression stayed my tongue. In that moment I realized the bitter truth. Cheryl had him too tightly leashed. He would never defend me, never put my needs before hers. I was alone in this battle. But even that knowledge wasn't enough to extinguish the last stubborn flickers of hope, of defiance, burning in my chest. If Marcus lacked the strength to stand up for me, for our marriage, then I would have to find it within myself to stand up for us both. No more placating Cheryl, no more walking on eggshells around her venom. It was time to fight back. Consequences be damned. I was done being a passive victim. My escape may have hit a roadblock, but I would not be silenced or cowed any longer. The war was only just beginning. The distant rumble of thunder was my signal. I finished stuffing the last of my belongings into a duffel bag and crept downstairs, muscles tense in anticipation. Lisa was already waiting in her beat-up sedan, hazard lights blinking through the rain-streaked windshield. I risked one last glance back at the cold, imposing house that had become my prison. No more. I was done being a captive. Lisa threw open the passenger door, eyes wide with urgency. "Hurry, we don't have much time before they realize you're gone." I nodded grimly, tossing my bag in the back seat. "Just get me out of here." "I don't care where we go." The engine roared to life, and we peeled out of the driveway in a spray of gravel. I watched the looming house recede in the rearview mirror, its harsh angles and blank windows already fading like a nightmare slipping from my mind. My heart hammered the entire nerve-wracking drive, half expecting Cheryl or Marcus to suddenly give chase. But the night remained dark and blissfully silent, broken only by the thrum of the wipers and the drumming rain. By dawn, we were cutting across state lines into a sleepy coastal town. The salty air clearing the lingering ache from my lungs with each reviving breath. "We'll be safe here," Lisa assured me as we pulled into a dingy motel bearing a vacancy sign. At least for now. I could only mutely nod my thanks, feeling unmoored and disoriented. Just yesterday I'd been trapped in that gilded cage of a home. And now I was free, yet utterly adrift. The motel room was cramped but clean, its cheerful ocean-themed decor a jarring contrast to the tasteful but oppressive design of my marital home. So many memories lingered in those cold, sterile rooms. Here, I could breathe again. Really, truly breathe. Lisa squeezed my shoulder, eyes shining with a mixture of worry and pride. You're out, Rach. You're finally out of that nightmare. The words hit me with a strange pang, my eyes stinging. I was out. I'd escaped. But at what cost? I don't know what to do now, I confessed in a small voice. Where do I even start to pick up the pieces? We'll figure it out, Lisa said firmly. For now, just focus on healing, on rediscovering who you are. The rest will follow. Easy for her to say. That years of conditioning under Cheryl's tyrannical rule had stripped me of any sense of identity beyond meek, obedient housefrau. Who was I, really, if not the cowering, defeated creature she'd molded me into? Lisa must have sensed my doubts. You're stronger than you think, Rach. That's why you got out. I wished I could share her conviction, but my mind kept spiraling back to Marcus and the shattered remnants of the life I thought we'd have. How could I ever trust myself or anyone again after being so thoroughly deceived? Over the next few days, I drifted through the unfamiliar town in a fog, half-heartedly job hunting as Lisa insisted, but struggling to imagine any future for myself beyond mere survival. I was rudderless, unmoored, suffocating beneath the weight of all I'd endured. So consumed by my inner turmoil that I nearly walked straight into an elderly gentleman on the boardwalk. Easy there, miss. The cheery voice broke through my stupor. You look 1,000,000 miles away. I blinked, refocusing on the kindly face and warm brown eyes crinkling with concern. For some reason, his affable manner immediately put me at ease. Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. I shifted the strap of my bag awkwardly. Just got a lot on my mind lately. Ain't that the truth? He chuckled, squinting against the sun. Say, you wouldn't happen to be looking for work, would you? My diner's in desperate need of an extra pair of hands. I opened my mouth to politely decline. What did I know about waitressing? But something made me pause. A flicker of possibility? Of purpose, however small? Or maybe I was just sick of drowning in my own misery. You know what? I'd really appreciate any job right about now. The old man's face crinkled into a sunny smile. Well, alrighty then. Name's Trevor, by the way. Let's get you started on a new chapter. Chapter. The word struck an odd chord deep within me, stirring faint embers of the creative spirit I'd thought long extinguished. A new chapter, free from the shackles of my past. I matched Trevor's smile, the weight on my chest feeling just a little bit lighter. Sounds perfect. I'm Rachel, and I'm ready to start over.